Chapter 275. Although most of the attack power increased by the weapon would not increase the magic elf's physical strength. But this was the so-called panel data. When the mechanical commander held the extreme giant nuclear blade and slashed with all its strength, its attack power could reach the peak of 3,000. Colossal nuclear rending blade was a crescent blade with an extremely long hilt. On the blade, there was a groove where boiling lava was flowing along the back of the blade. The blade was vibrating at a high speed, and it could easily tear through steel. When it held the extreme giant nuclear blade upside down, it suddenly had an aura that belonged to a swordsman, and it lost some of the mechanical dullness. When the polymorphic monster continued to chase after it, the mechanical commander waved the extreme giant nuclear blade and slashed it like a whirlwind. The metal surface of the polymorphic monster, which had a defense of 2,400, was easily torn apart like tofu. Swoosh! The polymorphic monster's spring leg was cut off. It was suddenly left with only one leg and could not stand. However, a hint of cunning flashed in its eyes. Its entire huge body pounced on the mechanical commander. With the momentum of Mount Tai, it completely exerted its last remaining heat. Remember this in 1 second. https://m Vipkanchu. VIP boom. The mechanical commander, who had just swung its blade and did not have time to retract it, was directly overwhelmed by the polymorphic monster. Originally, there wasn't much magic left, but after being pressed down by this force, it was directly crushed. The literal meaning of shattering. The mechanical commander's head rolled down and turned back into the mechanical component, core. Its arms also fell off and turned back into the mechanical component, extreme. Its legs began to separate from the ball below its waist and turned back into the mechanical component, split. The last one left was the mechanical component, giant. 1 star, 3 2 stars. Although each of them was broken and had little magic power left. But they were still alive. They were existences that could be used as sacrifices. The mechanical commander, which had an attack of 3,000 points, collapsed in an instant. Elsie Kevin didn't panic at all. Under everyone's gaze, he pulled out a magic card from his hand and stood in front of him, quickly casting the sacrificial summoning spell. The disintegration of the mechanical commander was completely within his expectations. His main goal was to use this opportunity to summon a new second-tier magic elf with full mana. At this moment, Doc already had 2 more magic cards in his hand that he had looted in the 5th round. One of them was Pride Eye, and the other was Ball Sea Lion. With the spherical sea lion, it meant that he could sacrifice and summon a 4-star magic guide spirit of the 2nd tier. He looked at the 2-star Ibu in the middle of the field, preparing to use it as a sacrifice to summon Fairy Ibu. Even though Fairy Ibu's attributes were countered by the steel element, its unique nimbleness made it more suitable for a duel than a milk can. Moreover, if it was just a normal attack, it wouldn't be affected by the so-called attribute restraint. Although Senior Kevin seemed to be a steel elementalist, he had never released any steel elementalist skills before. Most importantly, of course, it was because Big Milk Tank's attack was too low. Stubborn defense was a tactic. But now, he had to switch from defense to offense. After a little more than 3 seconds, he successfully summoned Ball Sea Lion. When the cute little sea lion appeared in the red side summoning area, Elsie Kevin's sacrificial summoning also showed signs of being activated. 3 of the mechanical components actually glowed. On the commentary platform, Wilson took a while to come back to his senses. He looked at the disintegrated mechanical components and the motionless polymorph monster. Suddenly, he noticed the 3 glowing mechanical components, and his heart skipped a beat. 1 star, 2 2 stars. It's a 5-star magic guide spirit of the 2nd tier. Contestant Elsie Kevin doesn't seem to be at a disadvantage. Or perhaps, everything is within his expectations? When contestant Dake Diming's fantasy beast collapses, who can stop a 5-star magic guide spirit? It's just a 5-star. Angelia sat in the seat of the belt with a closed book on her lap. After the previous match ended, she directly came here and found a suitable place to watch the match. The intensity of this match was beyond her expectations. She originally thought that her guess was high enough. She did not expect the two contestants to be even higher. Regardless of whether it was Dake Dimming who defeated her or Elsie Kevin, the winner of the previous Crimson Star, they were all powerful people who were beyond their level. However, since the start of the duel, on the surface, Elsie Kevin had been taking the initiative. However, anyone with a discerning eye could tell that Dake Dimming had been sitting on the fishing platform steadily. He was most likely the one who had the upper hand. As for the so-called 5-star magic guide spirit, she had summoned a 6-star Overlord Gorilla previously. Didn't she still lose? If it's really only a 5-star, I'm afraid it can't even beat that cat. There were all kinds of people. There were all kinds of speculations. The atmosphere between the gaps was also unusually intense. Elsie Kevin completed the sacrificial summoning before Dake. The three mechanical components turned into light and gathered in the air with the light from the magic card, forming a mysterious and complicated sacrificial summoning array. A pure 5-star magic guide sprite had appeared on the stage. Ow woo woo, when it stood upright, its height was definitely more than 2.5 meters. More than half of its body was covered with a mechanical shell. The steel claws on its left hand were terrifyingly huge. On its right shoulder was a flamethrower filled with pipes. Apart from the mechanical parts, its body was dark and decayed, emitting a faint smell of decay. When this cyborg werewolf appeared, it sent chills down one's spine. Card name, Cyborg Werewolf. Type, Sprite card. Level, Race, Mechanical type. Attribute, Steel type. Magic power, 1500. Attack, 2300. Defense, 1200. Ultimate skills, Iron Lock, Steel Claw, Oil Bomb Spray. The spirits of the dead from the Skaven Demon Rat Empire have broken through the barrier of history and reappeared in the world. Contestant Elsie Kevin's Cyborg Werewolf will show us the final horror of the ancient empire. Wilson's commentary sounded in a timely manner. It was like a voice-over caption. Luo Boat, who was sitting alone on the circular belt, suddenly felt his eyelids twitching. He could not help but think of his own cyborg werewolf. It was a magic guide spirit that originated from the same history. Could it be used as a reference for the series? He could not help but concentrate and watch the battle even more seriously. On paper, the cyborg werewolf stats were even stronger than the 7-star mechanical commander. With 2 skills, it was a genuine purple card and could be considered a rare type. However, after Elsie Kevin summoned it, he was still counting down the cooldown time in preparation for the next summon. He observed the field during the break and saw that the first-year students on the opposite side had also begun their sacrificial summons. The cute little sea lion and the even cuter magical beast turned into light at the same time. Dake Dimming once again displayed a summoning speed that was completely unlike that of a first-year student. From the sacrificial summoning array, a cute and beautiful magic guide spirit appeared on stage. With its fluttering ribbons and its vigorous and graceful body, it was as eye-catching as a dancer. Fairy Ibu had ascended the stage. Fairy Ibu, who had appeared on stage for the first time, softly called out. It felt a little bitter. The cyborg werewolf on the opposite side was not something it was good at dealing with. It had 3 skills: mesmerizing body, mesmerizing voice, and moon power. None of the skills would be effective against it. However, it had to complete its master's mission even if it had to grit its teeth. Even if it was destined to become a sacrifice to summon the Diru beast, it had to endure it with tears in its eyes. Whoa! Fairy Ibu, who was performing The Melancholy of a Beautiful Girl, suddenly raised her head and noticed a white light falling from above the cyborg werewolf. Then, a set of shiny silver metal armor appeared on its body. His defense value, which was originally 1200, suddenly increased to 1500. It slightly made up for its weak defense. Fairy Ibu did not wait for it to wipe its tears and complain. Not even 7 seconds later, another white light fell. On the cyborg werewolf's right hand, there was a scarlet claw that was even more terrifying than the steel claw on its left hand. Its attack power had increased by 300 points. From a full 2,300 attack power, it broke through the peak of 5-star attacks and reached the realm of 2,600. Me. Shameless. Fairy Ibu was angry. Me Yomi. Fairy Ibu also wants a small skirt. Fairy Ibu also wants gloves. Just when everyone thought that Fairy Ibu was shocked by the cyborg werewolf's full armor, only Dake rubbed his eyes and smiled bitterly. He had no choice but to promise, when I learn armor refining, I'll think of a way to get a set. Only then did Fairy Ibu relax its brows and jump up lightly. The magic elves of both sides charged toward the center line. A 4-star against a 5-star. However, the intense collision that everyone liked to see did not appear. Fairy Ibu was not stupid enough to attack the fully armed cyborg werewolf. It was good at using its advantages and circled around in a small area, showing extreme flexibility. The cyborg werewolf's originally rotten body was already not agile enough. With the thick metal armor, it was even more difficult to move around. The first test of contact passed in a flash. Drip. The 6th round arrived. Dake muttered in his heart. He suddenly touched his right hand and 2 new magic cards appeared in his hand. Pride 2, Diru Beast. The second Pride 2 card in his hand made Dake feel a little helpless. However, the appearance of the Diru Beast was a timely rain. He only swept his gaze over it, then suddenly raised his head and focused on the arena again. Fairy Ibu and the cyborg werewolf's attack was not affected by the change of round. In fact, it was even more intense. After the initial test, Elsie Kevin gave an order on the spot. Cyborg werewolf, spray oil bombs. The cyborg werewolf, which had just been performing magic circles with Fairy Ibu, instantly stopped. The container connected to the sprayer on its shoulder stirred, and the sound of boiling hot water could be heard. Fairy Ibu's ears perked up. It became vigilant and quickly retreated. However, the cyborg werewolf did not aim the sprayer at it. Instead, it suddenly fired into the sky. Under everyone's gaze. Puff, puff, puff. Oil bombs were sprayed into the sky like fireworks. Then, they suddenly exploded in the air. The smelly black oil fell like rain, covering a huge area. Fairy Ibu carefully avoided the smelly oil, but the space under its feet became smaller and smaller. It was still forced to step on the black oil. Its expression became more and more stiff. It thought to itself, how could such a disgusting skill exist in this world? It would be better to be killed by a shark than to be contaminated by this oil bomb. The oil bombs continued to spray. The arena was gradually filled with black oil. Fairy Ibu stepped on the oily arena. Its 4 paws could not hold on to the ground. Its slender 4 limbs were separated from each other. It had to use all its strength to stand firm. It realized that its advantage in agility was completely gone. My-oh! Fairy Ibu, who felt the danger, could not help but turn its head to look at its master on the arena and call out softly. Dake's expression also became sluggish at this moment. The cyborg werewolf's oil bomb spray seemed to be a sure-kill skill that complemented a fire-type skill. However, in the absence of a fire-type skill, it seemed to have another use. Moreover, this use was a great counter to him. His main force was led by the Diru Beast and supported by Ibu of each element. They were all small, nimble, and highly mobile magic guide fairies. Moreover, they relied on their high intelligence, which far surpassed that of ordinary magic guide fairies. They could also make very nimble dodging and attacking. However, the black oil on the ground perfectly restrained this characteristic. In this kind of environment, magic guide fairies with large bodies, strong grip, or flying magic guide fairies had an advantage. Unless there was a magic guide fairy that could perform the ice waltz on the oil. In any case, Fairy Ibu definitely could not do it. In this kind of environment, and facing the cyborg werewolf, it was most likely useless. Prepare to sacrifice. Taking advantage of the fact that Fairy Ibu's magic had not been depleted, it was a good choice to switch people in time. Dake took out the Diru Beast, tapped on the card surface, and said softly, "Diru Beast, can you skate?" Diru Beast. The newly born Diru Beast had only looked at the frozen lake from afar in the castle. It had not even walked out of Dake's dorm, so how could it skate? If it was given some time, it might be able to learn it. There's no other way, let's learn it now. Dake made a rude and unreasonable decision. The Diru beast crossed its arms and glared at him. However, Dake had already begun to prepare the sacrifice summoning spell. Fairy Ibu felt something in its heart. Although it was unhappy about the fate of being sacrificed, it had no time to care about other things. The fur on its feet had already been contaminated by the black oil. It was wet and messy, and it was very uncomfortable. However, the cyborg werewolf in front of it relied on its weight and the weight of its armor to stabilize its center. A trace of coldness flashed in its single eye, and then under Elsie Kevin's command, it slowly raised its left hand. Iron Chain Steel Claw. The sharp steel claw immediately aimed at Fairy Ibu, who was skating on the oil. Fairy Ibu felt a sense of alarm. However, the cyborg werewolf's steel claw had already shot out. The iron chain connecting the wrist to the steel claw made a clattering sound. The steel claw quickly shot out, stabbing towards Fairy Ibu, who was unsteady on her feet. Me. Fairy Ibu's hair stood on end. On the spot, it inserted the 2 satin ribbons into the black oil. Relying on the 2 new fulcrum points, it tried its best to control its body and fiercely slid forward. At the critical moment, it suddenly lowered its head and felt its scalp go numb, as if its entire scalp had been ripped open. However, what fell from the sky were only a few long hairs. Fairy Ibu let out a sigh of relief and noticed that the cyborg werewolf had already retracted its steel claw. It then aimed again. This thing actually had no cooldown. In its extreme anger, Fairy Ibu fiercely opened its mouth. Moonlight sprinkled down and gathered in its mouth, forming a pure ball of light. It slightly raised its head, and a beam of light shot out, fiercely shooting towards the cyborg werewolf's ugly face. Sure Kill Skill, Moon Force. Even though the power of a fairy's Sure Kill skill would be weakened against a steel elemental magic guiding fairy, this blow to the face was still very satisfying for Fairy Ivan. Then, the corner of its mouth crooked. When the iron chain steel claw shot out again, its whole body turned into light, and it charged towards the horizon. Bye-bye, you! The sacrificial summoning array unfolded in the air. The Diru beast spun as it floated out. Then, it suddenly opened its eyes, and its amber cat eyes fiercely glared at the cyborg werewolf. Cats and dogs were always natural enemies. When its feet landed on the ground, the sacred ring on its tail emitted a dense sacred aura. Magic power, 1500-2000. Attack, 1900-2400. Defense, 900-1400. Although it was a 4-star magic fairy. But in terms of 3 attributes, the Diru beast easily surpassed the cyborg werewolf's attributes. Even if the cyborg werewolf had been strengthened, it was only slightly higher than it. These were all within the scope of tolerance for mistakes. If it was a fair fight in the arena, the cyborg werewolf might not even be able to touch the Diru beast's fur. However, the greasy field that had been changed did indeed have a restraining effect on it. After the Diru beast landed, it slid forward and barely managed to stabilize its body. It forcefully concealed the sorry state on its face. It stood with its feet in the shape of an 8. Its upper body was lowered, and it tried to lower its center of gravity. Then, it used its cat tail to balance itself, and its 2 arms assumed a Wing Chun pose. Cat and dog once again formed a confrontation. Wilson, who was paying attention to the field, immediately exclaimed, "Amazing! Dake Diming's contestant actually summoned a 4-star magic fairy again. As a first-year student, he has so many second-tier magic fairies. Perhaps they are what he relies on to challenge those of a higher level. But in the face of a fully armed cyborg werewolf, how can this seemingly delicate cat person defeat it?" Most of the audience outside the field also held their breaths and stared. The archbishop next to the eldest prince opened his eyes again, revealing a strange expression. What a pure light aura! Although the Academy of Magic Engineering would not make a simple distinction between light and darkness in terms of good and evil, the Holy Church would give them a religious meaning. In the Academy of Magic Engineering of the Holy Church, darkness was rebellion, and fiends were the original sin. As long as someone refined a dark elemental magic guiding fairy, they would be bullied. If they refined a powerful fiend, then it was very likely that they would be collectively complained to the point of expulsion. On the contrary, light was favored. Especially the Angel of Light, it was the magic fairy that everyone dreamed of. If one wanted to obtain a high position in the Holy Church, the Angel of Light would be a very useful ticket. No matter how the Archbishop felt about Dake, at least he was very interested in Dake's Delu beast. Prince Charles noticed the Archbishop's expression and asked curiously, "What did you find?" The Archbishop said in a deep voice, "I have an idea." The eldest prince. The Archbishop, maybe we can start from him, for example. The eldest prince, for example. The Archbishop nodded slightly. The Holy Son. The eldest prince, the Holy Son? The Archbishop closed his eyes again. Let's wait and see. Dake didn't know that he had been targeted by the Holy Church's big shots after summoning the Delu beast. Even if he knew, he wouldn't care. With the little fiend beast protecting him, he wasn't afraid of being recruited by the Holy Church. Of course, Valkyrie Yvette was also very interested in the arrogant and reserved white cat. In the 6th round of the battle, Dake summoned the Delu beast, but Elsie Kevin didn't move at all. He seemed to be waiting for a certain opportunity, or perhaps he was waiting for a certain card. The cyborg werewolf stood in place and shot out, Iron Lock Steel Claw, again and again. But the Delu beast's reaction wasn't something Fairy Ivan could compare to. Although the ground was slippery, it could always slide and dodge the Iron Lock Steel Claw. That wasn't difficult to dodge. The Iron Lock Steel Claw had to be aimed every time it was shot out and could only attack in a straight line. Unless the opponent was a dummy that didn't know how to dodge, it would be very difficult to hit. Of course, in a normal duel, its killing effect was very significant. After all, not every magic guide fairy could react as quickly as the Delu beast. Just the slight delay between receiving and executing the order allowed the Iron Lock Steel Claw to successfully hit. The Delu beast sped up and seemed to have gradually gotten used to the feeling of sliding on the slippery ground. Although it was very unhappy with the pollution on the soles of its feet, it wasn't as unreasonable as Fairy Ivan. After getting used to it, it began to slide left and right, quickly approaching. The cat fist, on its right claw, was already charging. One punch. With just one punch, it would teach it to be a dog. It's coming. Elsie Kevin, who was on the blue team's platform, couldn't help but narrow his eyes. His fingers unconsciously rubbed one of the magic guide cards. His mind was focused like never before. Gotcha! The cyborg werewolf aimed again and shot. The Iron Lock Steel Claw shot out. The Delu beast had already closed in. At this moment, it slipped and smoothly dodged the steel claw this time. It estimated the time needed for the steel claw to retract. The cat tail wearing the holy ring suddenly tilted up and its body suddenly leaned forward. With a schwa sound, it slid forward. Killing technique. Cat fist. The sharp claws carried a terrifying aura as it punched towards the cyborg werewolf's abdomen. The armor that could provide 300 points of defense couldn't withstand the penetration of the cat's claws. It was almost torn apart like a piece of paper. The tip of the cat's claws touched the decaying flesh. A white light flashed and the power suddenly exploded. Boom! However, the one that was sent flying was the Delu beast. The cyborg werewolf suddenly raised its head and the muscles all over its body suddenly expanded. Even the mechanical shell expanded and the cat fist was reflected back. The Delu beast's magic power suddenly decreased. The cyborg werewolf raised its hand again and aimed the Iron Lock Steel Claw at the Delu beast that was in the air and had nowhere to go. The corner of its mouth revealed a sinister smile. On the blue team's platform, Elsie Kevin slowly put down the magic guide card in his hand. The cyborg werewolf's muscles that had just expanded began to shrink. However, its steel claw suddenly shot out. The Delu beast was in the air and had nowhere to hide. Although its eyes gathered light, it was useless. Meow! After a miserable cry, it fell to the ground with wounds all over its body. Its white fur was stained with black oil. It was in a sorry state. Dilu beast. Dake on the red team's platform couldn't help but shout. After the Dilu beast rolled twice, it struggled to get up. Its eyes were burning with anger. However, its HP was already very low. It had indeed suffered a heavy injury. At this time, it couldn't take any more damage. Is it a secret instrument card similar to the reflective wall? Dake's heart sank. Ever since the duel with Sarah, he had deliberately searched for information regarding secret instrument cards. This kind of magic guide card was usually made according to legends. It needed to meet special conditions to trigger it. The stronger the card, the harsher the conditions to trigger it. They could be set up beforehand and could be used immediately. In the end, it depended on the type of the card. Elsie Kevin's secret instrument card was obviously set up beforehand. When the Dilu beast dealt a heavy blow to the cyborg werewolf, it would automatically trigger. However, a secret instrument card of this level could only be triggered once. Of course, there were types that could be triggered multiple times. However, it wasn't likely to appear in the hands of a second-year student. Dake lamented, "Dilu beast, rest for a while." The Dilu beast that got up from the ground shook its head hard. Black oil dripped from its beard. Its eyes that were covered under its eyelids were full of coldness. If it still had strength at this time, it would have rushed up. Its head could be broken and blood could flow, but its fur couldn't be messed up. However, under its master's order, it resisted the impulse and slowly retreated to Huhu's side. Although Huhu was only a 3-star, it had a special charm that calmed people's hearts. Especially the juice that it squeezed out was especially delicious. The Dilu beast chose to return to defend. However, Elsie Kevin wouldn't give it a chance to breathe. She immediately ordered, "Cyborg werewolf, it's time to show your fangs." Roar. The cyborg werewolf raised its head and howled. Its long howl pierced through the clouds and echoed for a long time. When it lowered its head, its blood-red eyes were filled with fierceness. Shark. Tick. The 7th round. The cyborg werewolf had begun to charge. Dake suddenly took out 2 magic guide cards from the top of the deck. Trash Slime. Pride 3, his eyes flashed. He directly summoned Trash Slime. The slime that was like a pool of slime fell on Huhu's carapace and quickly slipped into the carapace. These 2 magic guide spirits immediately combined into a 4-star offering. However, Dake didn't immediately sacrifice it. Huhu's effect was not weaker than the 4-star magic guide spirits. At this time, if he used it as a sacrifice to summon Milk Can, although Milk Can could make milk to replenish the Dilu beast's magic power, when facing an unknown enemy, he would lose his trump card. Therefore, after he summoned Trash Slime, he began to summon Curse Cage, Little Devil Beast. Pride 3's arrival was very crucial. It could inject a dose of confidence into his lineup at this time. However, if he really used Pride 3, it meant that his strongest trump card, Basti Beast, had no chance to appear. Therefore, he was still hesitating. However, the situation was urgent. The cyborg werewolf stepped on the ground full of black oil and perfectly maintained its balance as it slid over at an extremely fast speed. If one looked closely, one would find that there was a special mechanical structure under its feet that allowed it to slide smoothly on the slippery ground. In just a few seconds, it had already slid close. The huge blood claw on its right hand gradually became wet as if there was blood flowing. Killing skill. Iron Lock Steel Claw. The steel claw that stretched out from its left hand quickly shot out and instantly hit the slow-moving Huhu. Huhu's magic power, which was not much to begin with, suddenly decreased by a small portion. Fortunately, the cyborg werewolf steel claw was based on its own attack power and didn't have the 300 bonus from the blood claw weapon. Otherwise, it would have lost half of its life. Bah! Huhu shook its head and was a little dizzy. Its tentacle-like neck hung down softly as if it was unable to fight anymore. However, Elsie Kevin, who already knew the hardness of Huhu, didn't fall for it and shouted, "Cyborg werewolf, close." The efficiency of the iron-lock steel claw was too slow. As long as the cyborg werewolf got close, it could use the bloodthirsty wolf claw. It immediately closed in, and the blood claw on its right hand released a dense bloody light. When it got close to Hoo-Hoo, it swung its claw and the bloody light drew a perfect arc in the air. However, Hoo-Hoo didn't move at all. Instead, its aura increased. Its soft tentacles suddenly bulged with hard muscles as it threw a punch at the cyborg werewolf. This punch was as fast as lightning. Although there was no sound of wind, it went straight through the cyborg werewolf's abdomen. Bang! The armor on its abdomen instantly shattered and the cyborg werewolf's body flew out like a kite with a broken string. Everyone was shocked. Hoo-Hoo got into a punching posture and its aura was like a rainbow. In the previous round of fighting, it used a total of 2 skills. First was equal strength sharing, which changed the cyborg werewolf's attack power from 2,300 plus 300 to 1,150 plus 300. A mere 1,450 attack power was naturally unshakable against Hoo-Hoo, whose defense was as high as 2,200. Then, it used Trick of Strength to replace its own defense with 1,150 attack power, gaining a full 2,200 attack power. The cyborg werewolf's defense was only at 1,200 plus 300. It couldn't withstand this concentrated punch. His 1,500 points of magic power also decreased by nearly 700 points as a result. It wasn't complicated, but there weren't many people who could understand this. Most of the audience only saw a 3-star little tortoise use its cylindrical tentacles that suddenly hardened to send the huge cyborg werewolf flying with one punch. The difference in size between the two sides made this sense of abruptness even more intense. When the cyborg werewolf fell, it made a loud noise. Black oil splattered all over the ground, turning it into a black dog. Phew, Dake breathed a sigh of relief. He was ready to control the magic ball and take off, but fortunately, the cyborg werewolf didn't attack the magic ball. Drip. The 8th round. Although the little fiendish magical beast was summoned, it only flapped its wings in front of the contestants' platform, silently waiting for the moment of evolution. Compared to Heidi Road Beast, it wanted to evolve into Fiendish Magical Beast, but its master didn't seem to think so. There was no choice. After all, the little fiendish magical beast was its master's most loyal servant. It was the record holder for the number of little red flowers. Heidi Road Beast. It shall be. So, could it be faster? It was dying of desperation. Seeing that the magic elves were glowing one after another, the little fiendish magical beast couldn't hold back anymore. It even winked at Dake from time to time. However, Dake ignored it and continued to draw cards. Before this round, he had already drawn 17 cards from his hand. There weren't many cards left in the deck. The probability of drawing the magic card that he wanted was also higher. Fusion. Silence Potion. The corner of Dake's eyes suddenly twitched. Finally, I got it. The moment Fusion was in his hand, he couldn't help but look at a certain spot in the ring. It just so happened that his eyes met with Panduola's. When their eyes met, Panduola immediately understood that Dake had drawn Fusion. Interesting. Does he want to use Fusion in this duel? As Panduola muttered softly, Dake had already retracted his gaze. He looked at his hand. Fusion, Silence Potion, Pride Eye, Pride 2, New, Pride 2, Old, Pride 3, Bliss 3, Moon, Milk Jar, Flicker Spell. I have all the cards I need. Next is the problem of how to summon them. The exclamations outside the arena couldn't affect him anymore. Dake thought quickly and took out Milk Jar first. Kettle's Equal Strength and Trick of Strength had entered a long cool-down period. In the end, only Sturdy and Equal Defense were left. It could be said that it had already made the best use of everything. Then, let's sacrifice. With Kettle and Trash Slime as sacrifices, sacrifice the summoning Milk Jar. In the red team's summoning area, Trash Slime poked its head out of Kettle's shell, knowing that it was going to be sacrificed again. Every time. It could only be a lowly sacrifice. In its memory, the only time it had been used in battle other than as a sacrifice was as a face-covering prop. It was fine before it gained sentience. Now, although its intelligence couldn't be compared to other magic spirits, it already had self-awareness. It would feel depressed, sad, and depressed about its uselessness. Could it be that my life can only be the life of a sacrifice? As its body gradually turned into light, Trash Slime couldn't help but think so. It looked at Kettle under its body with some envy. After glowing and heating up, Kettle raised its head high and happily accepted the fate of being sacrificed. Gulyalu. The third sacrifice. Since the start of the competition, Dake Dimming has already sacrificed 3 times to summon it. What kind of magic spirit will it be this time? What kind of surprise will it bring us? Wilson was so excited that he almost forgot his position. The president of the Aristocratic History Research Society glared at him fiercely. But he didn't notice. Instead, the light in the blue team's summoning area attracted his attention. Oh! Contestant Elsie Kevin is also preparing to sacrifice a summoning. The magic spirit he's going to sacrifice is a 5-star cyborg werewolf. As expected of the previous Scarlet Star champion, he actually managed to refine so many 5-star magic guiding spirits in his second year. I'm curious. How powerful is the 5-star magic spirit he's summoning with the cyborg werewolf as a sacrifice? How powerful is the cyborg werewolf? The sacrifice summoning of magic spirits was always so eye-catching. The audience's enthusiasm was aroused once again. The sacrificial summoning array in the red team summoning area was the first to light up. Moo Heart Suit, the cute pink milk cow that came out of the summoning array, immediately attracted the attention of many women. This might be the first time they felt that cows could be so cute. Card name, Milk Jar. Type, Elf card. Level, *******. Race, Bird Beast. Attribute, Normal. Magic Power, 2000. Attack, 1000. Defense, 2000. Killing skills, eat grass, drink milk, turn round, roll. Although Milk Jar was a gold card that was once crowned with the title of God card, it wasn't used many times in Dake system. This was because its position more or less overlapped with another gold card, Kettle. Both magic power and defense were 2000, and it had the skills, turn round, and drink milk. It could be said to be an unkillable super meat shield. One of the purposes of Dake's summoning was to use it as a shield to protect the magic conducting ball. The other purpose was to heal the Dilu beast. The chubby milk jar revealed a cute expression and slowly climbed to the front of the magic conducting ball and sat down. Then, it rubbed its hands and a bottle of milk appeared out of thin air. Moo! It waved its hand at the Dilu beast and then passed its milk to it. Although the Dilu beast had a "I don't eat food given to me" expression, the speed of reaching out its hands for the milk was extremely fast. After getting the milk, it immediately opened the lid and drank it all in one gulp. Ha! The excessive comfort and warmth that flowed through its body made the Dilu beast almost speak. It stuck out its pink little tongue and licked the remaining milk stains on the corner of its mouth. It casually threw the milk bottle to the ground and the entire cat's aura became strong again. With the support of the Divine Holy Ring, half of its 1900 magic power was instantly restored and returned to the safety line of 1000 points. It could still fight again. It's actually a healing-type magic conducting elf. Wilson's exclamation was late, but it arrived. The audience was talking about it because of this. Yvette looked at the pink milk cow and said unconsciously, "It should be delicious, right? The first princess." When the Dilu beast regained its combat power, Elsie Kevin's sacrificial summoning was finally completed. "Come out, my trump card." His voice was very soft, but since he didn't say it silently, it meant that he wanted others to hear it. Thus, everyone knew. The 5-star magic guiding sprite he had summoned was his trump card. Dake couldn't help but look over. He saw that in the blue summoning area, there was a cannon rising from the ground. Card name, Mechanical Cannon. Type, Elf card. Level, Race, Mechanical. Attribute, Steel. Magic Power, 1000. Attack, 2600. Defense, 2000. Ultimate skill, mechanical cannon. The fully metal cannon was nearly 3 meters tall. Its chassis was circular and there were metal arms on both sides. In the middle of its body, there was a super cannon barrel with a diameter of 1 meter. It was hard to imagine how terrifying a cannon fired from such a huge cannon barrel would be. The top 3 stats of a 5-star magic conducting elf were 2500. This mechanical cannon's attack was over 2,500 points. Even though it was only over 100 points, this was a symbol of power. It's actually a cannon from an ancient civilization. Contestant Elsie Kevin, how many more surprises will he bring us? Wilson's sigh sounded slowly, but it was the voice of most of the audience. At this moment, Elsie Kevin, who hadn't said much since the beginning, suddenly raised his head and said, "Dake Dimming." Dake. Yes. Kevin, your talent is not bad. Dake. Kevin, before the competition, I thought that you would be very troublesome, but I didn't expect you to be so troublesome. I have to say, even among the first years of the past few batches, there are very few people like you. Dake. There are. Kevin, but you've only studied for half a year, and I've studied for 3 times as long as you. Dake. Hello, senior. Kevin, although talent can decide a lot, with enough time, one can fully display their talent. Dake. Elsie Kevin spoke tirelessly, as if he was preaching and declaring at the same time. In the end, he said, my mechanical cannon only has the power of 1 shot. But this shot can turn you into ashes. As soon as he finished speaking, suddenly, a rumbling sound came from the body of the mechanical cannon. The huge cannon slowly rotated, and energy gathered at a high speed. Dake only had time to say, "Round." A terrifying beam of light shot out from the barrel of the cannon. Boom! Until the deafening sound of the cannon resounded in the stadium. Only then did Doc suddenly realize. What senior brother Kevin said just now was actually part of the battle strategy. More than half of the audience subconsciously covered their ears. In the blink of an eye, the mechanical cannon's huge cannon had crossed a distance of 100 meters, and a beam of light with a diameter of 1 meter completely blasted on Big Milk Can's body. Once Big Milk Can couldn't withstand this terrifying huge cannon, the magic conducting ball behind it would directly attack. But at the moment when the beam of light engulfed his vision, Dake finally saw Big Milk Can successfully curl up into a ball, and a mirror-like energy shell surrounded it. The beam of light that blasted on the ball was partially scattered. The Diru beast nimbly dodged to the side. But the little demon beast in the air had one of its wings pierced through. Wah 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 wah. Its cries of pain were extremely pleasant to the ears at this moment. Dake nervously looked at Big Milk Can's magic conducting card in his hand. The magic value that recorded its life was rapidly decreasing at a speed visible to the naked eye. After turning round, Big Milk Can's defense reached 3,000 points, but it couldn't completely block this terrifying mechanical cannon. The so-called trump card, the so-called one shot to erase enmity, it seemed that it wasn't a lie. But if he wanted to rely on this shot to turn Big Milk Can into ashes? Dake could only say that he was thinking too much. A defense value of 3,000 points was not just for show. Big Milk Can's magic value finally fell to about 800 points before it completely stabilized. This meant that this shot of mechanical cannon had caused about 4,200 points of damage. If it was any other 4-star magic conducting sprite, even a perfect type magic conducting sprite like the Demon Beast, it probably wouldn't be able to withstand this head-on shot. But now in front of him was Big Milk Can. Moo! As the beam of light disappeared, Big Milk Can stopped rounding, and fell to the ground. It subconsciously rubbed its hands as if it wanted to rub out a bottle of milk. But although the cool down of drinking milk wasn't long, it could only be used once in a duel. Of course, it couldn't rub it out. Big Milk Can, who had failed to cast the skill, touched its head and sat there in a daze for a while. At this time, the scene was completely silent. Dake looked up and saw Senior Kevin's shocked face. It was as if he felt that it was unbelievable from the bottom of his heart. And in the summoning area below, the mechanical cannon that had fired the mechanical cannon was actually gradually turning into light. This meant that it had expended a total of 1,000 points of magic power to fire that shot. But its opponent didn't turn into ashes. Yet, it had been reduced to ashes before he could do anything. When the mechanical cannon turned into light and returned to the magic conducting card, Elsie Kevin suddenly woke up from his daze. As a duelist, he made the most correct decision at this moment. He suddenly raised his finger and pulled the blue magic conducting ball that was protected by the silver eggshell into the sky with his magic power. Tisk! The Diru beast, who had just prepared to reverse the situation and take revenge, put down its raised front foot. At this time, in the duel arena, on the red side, there was still Big Milk Can, the Diru beast, and the little demon beast. On the blue side, there was still the remains of the 2-star mechanical components and the eggshell equipment, which meant that there was nothing left. Up until now, the duel had already gone through 8 rounds. Seeing that the 9th round had arrived, the situation between the two sides had gradually become clear. At this moment, unless Elsie Kevin had some divine skills, he would definitely lose. Dake calmed down and silently prepared to summon the demon beast. The demon beast that had wings and could teleport could be said to be the killer of the magic conducting ball. Even with the protection of the eggshell equipment, it was just a matter of one more punch. As for Fusion and Basti Beast, this was a duel, not a place to show off one's skills. But just as he was about to start the summoning, he heard a tick sound. The change of round meant that there was a change in the situation. The scene of a duelist who was in a desperate situation and relied on a key card to turn the tables was the most exciting. However, if he was the one who was turned around, it would not be a fun thing to do. Dake turned his finger and pointed at Bliss 3, Moon, and prepared Pride Eye. The whole process took less than 10 seconds. The little demon beast evolved into a black Diru beast, under the light of Bliss. Then, Pride took back its mind. On the other side, the magic conducting ball that was floating in the sky and surrounded by eggshell equipment actually burst out with an extremely bright light. No one expected it. The eggshell equipment that Elsie Kevin summoned in the first round was actually a hidden foreshadowing. Elsie Kevin, who was almost desperate just now, held up one of the magic conducting cards at this time. The shining light of the magic conducting card illuminated his face. At this time, he no longer had the calmness that he had when he first went on stage. The hope of survival in a desperate situation made him fall into a state of ecstasy. The so-called God's Whip was nothing more than this. Hatch. Mechanical Dragon. Ritual Summoning. Dake's mind raced and suddenly recalled this special summoning method. The so-called ritual summoning was to summon a special magic conducting spirit through the secret instrument card. This summoning method originated from various cumbersome and complicated prayer rituals in ancient times, offering praise to God and asking for God's descent. It was used until today when the effect of the special secret instrument card was completed and the special magic conducting spirit could be summoned. It was not easier than the sacrificial summoning method. Therefore, there were not many duelists who used the ritual summoning method. Elsie Kevin's eggshell equipment seemed to be the basic card that fulfilled this condition. The conditions were very likely to be included, such as receive 0 damage, protect the target for at least a few rounds, and so on. Of course, a special secret instrument card to activate the ritual was definitely one of the necessary conditions. In short, there must be a lot of hidden conditions. But since it had been activated, it meant that the conditions had been met. Dake did not think too much and raised Fusion high at the same time. There was only a trace of cloud floating in the sky at 9:30. Looking up from below, it was as clear as the blue sea. On the commentary platform, Wilson knocked on his forehead. The short 5-minute commentary made him feel mentally tired, not to mention the fierce battle between the two duelists on the stage. As a second-year student, Elsie Kevin's strength was already very surprising. However, as a first-year student, Dake Dimming was not inferior to Kevin at all, which was even more shocking. At this moment, the president of the Aristocratic History Research Society was probably doubting his life. The audience who had specially chosen to come here today were all lucky, because they were about to witness the rise of a rising star. So, Who was that rising star? Wilson cleared his throat and suddenly shouted, "The time to witness a miracle has come." Contestant Elsie Kevin used the ritual summoning method and successfully hatched the mechanical dragon. And contestant Dake. If I'm not wrong, that's a fusion card. After Wilson's shout, the sound waves began to radiate from the periphery of the arena and spread out bit by bit. The speed was getting faster and faster, and the range was getting bigger and bigger. The whole arena was suddenly filled with endless cheers. In the sea of cheers, the Archbishop stared at the Heidi Road beast that had just been summoned and thought to himself, "What a pure dark aura! Holy white cat! Evil black cat!" The Archbishop realized that his previous plan of becoming the Son of God was ruined before it even started. Beside him, the eldest prince seemed to be attracted by the duel. He craned his neck to watch. "Archbishop, who do you think will win in the end?" The Archbishop squeezed out a sentence. "The winner will win." The eldest prince choked and was speechless for a long time. Yvette in the front row became excited again. The eldest princess's mouth twitched. Luo Si and Di Anna in the ring shook the sign together. The first-year students of the aristocratic academy led by Doran shouted, "Come on." A little further away, Panduola had unknowingly stood up. The fusion card in Dake's hand also contained her power. Crack! The silver eggshell that wrapped the magic conducting ball suddenly cracked open. It rose up a distance. At this time, no one noticed that the magic conducting ball's life enchantment had dimmed. They only saw a ray of light shoot into it. It reflected from the first eggshell fragment and spread to almost all the eggshells, forming an extremely complicated summoning array. The summoning array was filled with light like a sea of stars. A mechanical dragon poked its head out from it. The silver-white mechanical dragon flapped its wings and flew out of the summoning array. Its body was smooth and textured. Its neck was slender, and its silver wings were as sharp as blades. Its 2 claws shone with dazzling light. It had thick lower limbs, an extremely long dragon tail, and 2 antennae-like antennae at the tip of its tail. It flew into the sky under the gaze of tens of thousands of people. The dragon's head was exquisite, its facial features were delicate, and its silver-white scales were sharp and angular. It was as beautiful as the stars. It made people envious. Card name, Mechanical Dragon. Type, Elf card. Level, Race, Mechanical. Attribute, Dragon/Steel. Magic power, 2500. Attack, 3000. Defense, 2500. Killing skills, Steel Charge, Metal Storm. After summoning the mechanical dragon, Elsie Kevin's eyes lit up. He was excited. He turned his head abruptly and looked at Dake dimming opposite him. The fusion, in Dake's hand, also bloomed with a light that didn't lose to others. A large amount of magic power was poured into the fusion. The black and white fish on the surface of the card shook its tail and naturally swam out of the card, growing to more than 2 meters long. Then, the white fish flew toward the Stylu beast, who was standing with its arms crossed. The black fish flew toward the Stylu beast, who was waiting with its head raised. The black and white fishes circled around the 2 magic guiding fairies and turned them into black and white lights, which soared into the sky. The 2 fish converged in the air and fused into one like a Tai Chi, forming a huge and mysterious magic array. Then, the elven model of the Egyptian cat goddess danced out of the magic array. Soft long hair and an exquisite face perfectly explained the beauty of a woman with a slender waist and a moving body. Whether it was the inner or outer charm, it made people unable to control themselves. Her body was covered in pearls, gems, and golden rings. Although it was a little exaggerated, it made people intoxicated. Money and wealth, women and beauty. The elven model gathered 2 fatal elements. The Basti beast. The cat goddess. Although it didn't have the majestic aura of the mechanical dragon when it was born, its feminine beauty and endless charm made it instantly snatch away a lot of attention from the mechanical dragon. "What's wrong, Archbishop?" Prince Charles was still intoxicated by the charm of the Basti beast when he suddenly found that the Archbishop beside him had silently stood up. But after he asked, the Archbishop slowly sat down again. His old face twitched slightly, and he said something that no one would believe. Nothing. He just smelled a trace of God, that's all. Card name, Basti Beast. Type, Elven card. Level, race, subhuman. Attribute, dark. Magic power, 3,500. Attack, 3,400. Defense, 2,700. Killing skills, chaos, vampire's dance. The Valkyrie looked at the elven model summoned by her son with a fusion in astonishment and asked in bewilderment, "Claire, what's going on?" Claire shook her head, indicating that she didn't know. Pan Duola's eyes flickered, and his expression was uncertain. He suddenly regretted teaching him fusion. The professors who had been silently watching the battle couldn't sit still at this time. Let's not talk about other things. This elven model summoned by Dake Diming's fusion was a 7-star, right? A 7-star, third-tier elven model. Both were 7 stars, but the previous, mechanical commander, was completely pieced together. Both sides were fundamentally different in the core. Steel charge. Elsie Kevin's roar interrupted the professor's thoughts. The mechanical dragon in the sky suddenly turned around, and its body shone with silver light. Its body was very smooth and streamlined, and its wings were extremely sharp when they spread out. When it charged, it instantly turned into a silver arrow. The atmosphere was torn apart, and the whistling sound was ear-piercing. Everyone couldn't help but look over at this moment. Their minds were blank, and there was only this amazing scene on the field. On the red team's platform, Dake's eyes were calm, and he wasn't worried at all. From the moment he made the decision to summoning the Basti Beast, he already had victory in his grasp. As if responding to his trust, the Basti Beast standing in the red team's summoning area smiled charmingly. Then, it gently raised its hand, and a huge cat claw that didn't match its figure grabbed toward the sky. From its body, a group of bats suddenly drilled out. Those bats flew along its arm and formed a group where its palm pointed. Finally, they melted into the darkness. Clumps of dark power kept gathering in its palm, gathering, and gathering again. It formed a huge black hand. That wasn't a sure kill skill, chaos, nor was it a sure kill skill, vampire's dance. It was a pure use of its own power. Whoosh! The silver arrow whistled over. The huge mechanical dragon and the petite cat goddess formed a sharp contrast. The distance between the two sides kept closing. Finally, there was no way to hide or retreat. The Basti Beast's huge dark hand suddenly tightened, and it actually grabbed the mechanical dragon's head. The mechanical dragon suddenly stopped, and steel charge didn't cause any waves. Capturing the dragon with one hand. On the blue team's platform, Elsie Kevin's face was already distorted with shock. At that moment, he suddenly had an epiphany and sobered up. He lost his composure and roared like never before, "Metal Storm." The mechanical dragon that received the order suddenly flapped its wings. A powerful airflow spurted out from under its wings. With its head as the fulcrum and its spine as the axis, its entire body began to rotate at high speed. Silver light lingered, like a knife. Before the storm was formed, its momentum was already awe-inspiring. However, the Basti Beast suddenly smiled faintly. From its right arm, tentacles formed by dark power gushed out one by one, wrapping around the mechanical dragon's head and binding it tightly from head to tail. Crack! The mechanical dragon's rotation came to an abrupt halt. The Basti Beast tiptoed, took a dance step, and then pulled down, smashing the huge mechanical dragon to the ground. Bang! Fortunately, this was the Shang Molian field, which was hard enough to last for 1,000 years. Otherwise, it would have been shattered. However, the mechanical dragon that was smashed down was not in a good state. Its magic value had almost disappeared by half. Elsie Kevin, who was holding the mechanical dragon magic card in his hand, knew best. The moment he saw the magic value disappear, his fingers trembled violently, and the mechanical dragon magic card suddenly slipped. He reached out and wanted to grab it. However, more magic cards slipped through his trembling left hand. One card after another flew in the air and fell to the ground. Bang! There was another loud bang. Bang! The third loud noise. Bang. The fourth loud noise. After that, there was no more movement. Countless light spots flew into the sky like stars and flew back into the mechanical dragon magic card. The Basti beast on the ground tiptoed and danced, the two cat tails behind its buttocks swaying lightly. Then, it flicked its finger at the blue magic ball in the air. A bat flew out and turned into a bullet when it approached the magic ball. With a poof, it hit the enchanted field of life outside the magic ball. The enchanted field of life, which had a large amount of magic power sucked away by the mechanical dragon, suddenly shattered like glass. Beep! The winner has been decided. Winner, Dake Dimming. The referee blew his whistle, and his voice was full of excitement. This duel was so exciting that it was hard to imagine that it was a match between the first and second years. Many of the audience only woke up from the shock at this time. In an instant, shouts like a tsunami surged like a tide. Angus Jeffrey, the president of the Aristocratic History Research Society, raised his hand abruptly and found that there was no cup to throw after a long time. Mike Owen, who was next to him, had a flicker in his eyes, but there was no anger. The first years of the Aristocratic Academy were jumping around excitedly. They couldn't wait to rush out of the ring and give the winner of this duel the warmest hug. Dake Dimming was their pride. Although the first years of the other academies were not as exaggerated as the Aristocratic Academy, they were also very excited. Even Luo Boat was cheering. Ai Ma and Sarah gritted their teeth silently. Eudora was so excited that her face was flushed. Luo C and D Anna tried hard to look at the red team's contestant platform. Panduola showed a bright smile. The Valkyrie, who wanted to jump up, was pulled back by the first Princess Elisha. Claire gently stroked Galileo in her arms. The first prince sighed slightly. The Archbishop's expression was tense. It was just a newcomer's competition. It should have been insignificant. But now, what was going on? 8 in 116,000 words. Come back tomorrow to correct the wrong words. Chapter 276. On the Red Team's Platform. Dake narrowed his eyes slightly, feeling the joy of victory. Although this duel didn't last long, it had consumed a lot of his spirit. However, the roars that were like a tsunami made him slightly excited. Is this a duel? A thrilling and exciting duel. A hearty victory. It made him recognize what a duel was once again. People could be indifferent, but they couldn't be without desires. The newcomer competition had given him a new perspective on duels. He didn't look at the audience immediately. Instead, he turned his head slightly and looked at Elsie Kevin opposite him. This senior Kevin was really a good opponent. Website: https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. It would be great if he had the chance to fight again. Elsie Kevin picked up the magic card and stood up, just in time to meet Dake's gaze. He subconsciously took a deep breath. The emotions that he had lost control of just now had been adjusted with the passage of time. He took out the magic card and put away the remaining mechanical components in the arena. If it was a duel, there would be victory and defeat. It wasn't the first time he had failed. The reason why he had lost his composure at the end of today's duel, apart from the fact that his opponent was a first year, was mainly because the duel was too intense and had made him too engrossed. Once a person was too engrossed, it was not easy to control their emotions. After sorting out his emotions again, he looked at Dake and said first, "I lost." Dake nodded slightly. "Thank you for letting me win." Their voices were covered by the shouts that hadn't subsided yet. It was only to the extent that both sides could barely hear each other. Although it was only a simple exchange of words, both sides had a good impression of each other. The two of them greeted each other again and then looked away. Dake picked up the magic card and put away the big milk can in the arena. Then, he began to replenish his magic one by one. The fusion time limit of the Basti beast hadn't passed yet. He hadn't mastered the fusion removal technique. At that moment, Dake began to look below the stage. He first saw the three people led by the Valkyrie, then raised his hand and waved at Arvette. Arvette's eyes lit up, and she quickly raised her hand and waved fiercely. The eldest princess didn't stop her this time. She could understand the Valkyrie's excitement. Dark shifted his gaze slightly and looked at Claire, who was beside him. Claire raised Galileo's paw and waved it at him. Dake couldn't help but laugh. This cat was still so fat. Then, he retracted his gaze and looked around the ring. He caught sight of Diana, Luosi, and Panduola, and stopped looking. After all, he still had to continue in the next match, and he couldn't keep occupying the contestant platform. When he walked down from the contestant platform, the Basti beast came to his side with light steps. "Let's go," Dake said softly. The Basti beast followed him all the way into the contestants' tunnel. Charlotte waved at him and congratulated. "I didn't expect you to win." Dake smiled and said, "Luck, I guess." Then he greeted White, who was waiting at the entrance. "Hi, God. Are you in the next match?" White's smile was a little bitter, but he still replied, "Yes, I am." Dake said politely, "Do your best." "White. Thank you." White Gouda walked out of the contestant tunnel and walked to the red contestant platform. He didn't look very energetic from the back. Dake asked curiously, "What's wrong with him?" Demi Charlotte shook her head slightly and said, "Maybe he's under too much pressure." Dake thought about White's situation and agreed. Maybe. Sometimes, bearing the weight of too many people's expectations was actually a very difficult thing. Fortunately, his own pressure came from within. No one gave him excessive expectations. Forget it. He turned and walked into the tunnel, but he didn't return to the contestant lounge. Instead, he turned to another tunnel that led to the ring. When there was no one around, he said to the Basti beast, "Thank you for your hard work today." But the Basti beast didn't respond. Dake subconsciously turned his head to look. Suddenly, a hint of musk entered his nose. Before he could turn his head, he felt a slight itch on his neck. It was the feeling of hair tickling his skin. Two delicate arms took the opportunity to surround him and wrap around his neck. A breath like orchids blew into his other ear, making him feel a little uncomfortable. "Stop messing around," Dake said helplessly. So after he mastered fusion, the number of times he summoned the Basti beast could be counted on one hand. Because it was too difficult to deal with. Meow, heart suit, the Basti beast naturally wouldn't be affected by such a soft command. Dake reached out and grabbed one of its tails. Then, he grabbed the tip of the tail and gave it a hard tug. The Basti beast was like a cat that had been grabbed by the back of its neck. It instantly softened. Dake casually threw it away, looking like he didn't want to admit his mistake. He straightened his collar and said proudly, "I'm going out. Remember not to expose yourself." "Okay." The Basti beast followed behind him like a little wife who had been wronged. When the sun shone, the man and the pet had already walked out of the passage. Dake searched his memory and found the corner where Senior Panduola was. He sat down beside her very naturally, attracting a lot of attention. "Senior, how was it?" Dake asked. Panduola glanced at the Basti beast beside Dake in an extremely obscure manner and said, "Is this the result of fusion?" Dake nodded. "If it wasn't for fusion today, I really don't know what the outcome would have been. Senior Kevin is really a strong opponent." Panduola smiled. "You just haven't accumulated enough. By this time next year, his level..." Dake blinked, confirming that he had heard something from Senior Panduola. He said, "I heard that in the previous batch of first years, almost no one could join the duel club in advance?" Panduola, "I don't pay much attention to that. However, there are only a few second-year students who are worth watching this year. Well, Elsie Kevin can barely be considered one of them." She spoke very deliberately. However, Dake suspected that it wasn't that the second-year students weren't good enough, but that her standards were too high. Beep. The whistle sounded. The 11th duel of the morning had begun. Dake whispered something to Senior Panduola and then left from the back. Today was a rare day. He wanted to be closer to his family. The height difference between the spectator seats and the ring was only 1 meter, but the distance between the two was more than 3 meters. There was a buffer zone in the middle. Because the audience couldn't actually reach the ring from the spectator seats, there were no protective barriers or other things in between. However, the students couldn't go to the spectator seats either, so they couldn't communicate very well. It was just that they could see the spectator seats from the ring. However, they couldn't see the ring from the spectator seats. This was a measure to protect the privacy of the students. Dake walked to the ring closest to Arvet and found a seat to sit down. Accompanied by the Basti beast, he silently replenished the magic of the magic elves. People had to be able to withstand popularity and cold treatment. Of course, he wouldn't act like a child and act coquettishly with his mother. Just being closer to her could make his mood gradually ease. He indeed didn't have any external pressure. However, the internal pressure wasn't something that ordinary people could compare to. He put down his thoughts and carefully felt it. The winter temperature seemed to have warmed up. About 3 meters behind him. Arvet didn't know that her baby was sitting in front of her. She only had the mentality of a parent watching a child's performance. After watching the performance, since she couldn't have further contact with her child, she would just go back. However, the first princess pulled her back helplessly. Let's wait until White Gouda's competition before leaving. God? Arvet couldn't help but think of the mischievous God. Because the battlefront was different, her memories of Brett God only stopped at the time when she was a student and the final Demon King crusade. As for the rest, she didn't know much. In fact, her relationship with Brett God wasn't particularly good. At most, they were members of the same club. Arvet thought for a moment and said, God's family is indeed prone to producing heroes, but what evidence can prove that White Gouda is a future hero? Just based on that useless holy sword curse? First Princess Elisha said, It's a prophecy. The deputy castellan of Sky City, Granny Maggie of No Way Forest, made a prophecy about this. White Gouda will be a hero. When the world is in danger again, he will step forward bravely, just like his father. Arvet shook her head. Of course I know that. But if the prophecy is really so accurate, he wouldn't have sacrificed so much in the battle with the demons. Elisha, although I think so too, it's better to believe it than not. We all know that this world isn't actually safe. Arvet sighed. That's why I don't want to continue with internal friction. On the other side, Prince Charles and the Archbishop had finally met the hero they had been waiting for. The hero had always been favored by the light, and had a good relationship with the Holy Church, so the relationship between the two sides was generally not bad. The previous batch of heroes also received support from the Holy Church at the beginning of their graduation. It was only later that they fell out because of something, but it wasn't to the extent that it couldn't be resolved. At least, that was what the Holy Church thought. They came this time to see the talent potential of the hero. On the other hand, they wanted to observe the character of the hero. Only by understanding a person as much as possible could they make targeted strategies. Whether it was for the sake of righteousness or ZZ factor, they needed to be prepared. On this point, they actually had the same idea as the first princess. He's finally here. Is this the future hero? As White Gouda stepped onto the contestant platform, the first prince couldn't help but become serious. Just from his appearance alone, Victor seemed to fit the impression that brave hearts always gave people. That kind of natural affinity made it easier for people to trust him. Moreover, he really looks like the previous hero. After careful observation, the first prince couldn't help but think, I wonder how he compares to the son of the Valkyrie. White Gouda stood on the red team platform and looked down. He found Luo Boat and some of his classmates from the Night Academy. Since the astronomy class, his classmates' attitude toward him had improved a lot. There were also many people cheering for him. But he really didn't have much confidence. Especially after watching the entire duel between Dirk and Kevin, he was once again deeply aware of the gap between the two of them. If his opponent was like Elsie Kevin, he felt that he should just admit defeat. Fortunately, it wasn't. On the commentary platform, Wilson sipped his tea and began the round of commentary without stopping. Without the constraints of the society, his commentary was more relaxed. White Gouda. One of the 7 people who joined the duel club early this year, known as Lucky Gowda, is the son of the hero. Wilson almost roared the end of his speech. But the audience didn't seem to have switched over from the previous duel, so he had to say it again. He's also a first year. After the son of the Valkyrie, the son of the hero is closely following. Both of them are the descendants of the kingdom's twin swords, and they are both promising newcomers. Presumably, White Gowda won't be inferior to Dake Dimming. He can also bring us a wonderful duel. What I'm worried about now is whether his opponent can make him show his true strength. Then, let's welcome the blue team's contestant, David Leonard. Leonard is a second year's top student, and he successfully joined the duel club last semester. By the way, he is also a member of the Knight Academy. First year versus second year, the internal battle of the Knight Academy, a competition between bravery and bravery. With Wilson's efforts, the audience's attention was finally pulled back. People suddenly realized that the black-haired boy on the stage was the rumored son of the hero. So, the atmosphere was finally livened up. And the competition also began at this time. David Leonard was a second-year student of the Knight Academy. Like most of the Knight Academy students, he was happy that the son of the hero had entered the Knight Academy at the beginning of school. But after school started, he gradually stopped paying attention to him like most of the Knight Academy students. After all, the Shang Malian studies weren't easy, and they didn't have much energy to pay attention to a first-year student for a long time. As for the things that happened to the son of the hero, naturally, they had heard of it. As the son of the hero, it seemed very normal to be at the center of the incident. Moreover, White's results in the Halloween event were actually quite good. This time, he had also successfully joined the duel club. Compared to the average student, he was already very good. Most people just lowered their attention to him and didn't do anything else. This time, David Leonard was a little excited to be the opponent of White Gowda. He boasted that he was about to become the touchstone of the hero and that even if he lost, he wouldn't lose face. But their previous duel had pulled the upper limit of the standard too high. Leonard knew that he definitely couldn't play the role of Elsie Kevin. At least, he only had 2 second-tier magic elves in his hands, similar to Anna's opponent. It would be a pity if he couldn't let the son of the hero play to his heart's content because his level was too low. But since things had come to this, he could only bite the bullet and walk onto the stage of the duel. Preparation stage, 30s. The panel on the table showed the countdown of the preparation stage. The 2 people who didn't have much confidence drew cards at the same time. After the first 5 cards, White quickly glanced at them. Troll. He was suddenly happy. Starting with Troll was a very common scene in the duel competition. After all, it belonged to the popular card series. With 1,500 attack and 1,400 defense, it was ranked at the top of the 3-star magic elves. Therefore, when the battle stage began, White immediately summoned Troll. The troll, which was as strong as a hill, appeared with a roar. Except for its ugly appearance, it really didn't have many shortcomings. Only the Archbishop frowned slightly. Why is it a troll? Even if it wasn't a light-type magic elf like the Diru beast, it shouldn't be a troll, right? But then, White summoned the 2-star, 2-headed ogre. If there had to be a classification, then White's card deck at this time was actually more inclined towards the Underground Monster series. That obviously wouldn't be in line with the aesthetics of an archbishop. In contrast, the Paladin, Ji and Paladin, Shui, that David Leonard summoned had the characteristics of the Holy Church. The 2 paladins that were almost identical would trigger the halo called Philosophy when they appeared at the same time. Within the range of the Philosophy halo, the Paladin series magic elves would receive 100 points of magic power bonus. Among the 3 bonuses, the magic power bonus was usually considered inferior to the attack bonus and defense bonus. However, the Paladin series magic cards were generally very lacking in magic power. With the Philosophy halo, it could slightly make up for this flaw. Moreover, David Leonard's Paladin series was mainly a combination of halos. Through the stacking of different halos, the power of the Paladins would be increased more evenly, thus winning the group battle. Generally, This was David Leonard's tactical system. Paladin, Zhe and Paladin, Shui, were both 3-star magic elves, but except for defense, their 3 attributes were inferior to White's, Troll. Therefore, at the beginning of the duel, David Leonard was slightly at a disadvantage. But at the beginning of the second round, David Leonard summoned Paladin, Wind, and Paladin, Fury. The combination of the Storm, Halo gave all the Paladin series magic elves a 100-point attack bonus. The situation began to slowly reverse. In the third round, David Leonard summoned Paladin, Fury. The Fury Halo formed by the combination of Paladin, Fury, and Paladin, Fury, gave all the Paladin series magic elves another 100-point attack bonus. Therefore, the team of 6 Paladins defeated White's Troll. Even if the Troll used Sacrificial Charge, it only replaced 1 Paladin, but it was not a big deal. White relied on the rest of the magic elves to barely hold on. In the 5th round, he finally had Taboo Love and Luminous Python in his hands. The appearance of Luminous Python made the Archbishop, whose face was as gloomy as water, finally regain a little patience. After all, it was of the light attribute. However, even the Troll was besieged by the Paladin group, so the Luminous Python naturally could not hold the fort alone. White relied on the Luminous Python's large-scale killing skill, Sacred Light, to barely kill 2 2-star Paladins, before he was besieged and killed. The 6th round. White used Taboo Love to make Paladin, Zhe turn against him and obtain a certain result. He also struggled to survive this round. However, because there was no stronger magic card, even if he survived this round, he could not see his future. He was just muddling through. Due to the restraint in his hands, he was unable to refine a new magic card this week. His research on the Holy Sword Curse was still in the early stages. Most of his time was spent on schoolwork and the occasional relaxing magic chess. The Knight Academy did not have teacher Dake Diming's after-class teaching. The math test paper stumped most of the first-year students of the Knight Academy who were not so smart. The duel ended. David Leonard sighed as he looked at the 2 4-star magic guide fairies in his hand. He could have sacrificed and summoned the 4-star magic elves in the first few rounds to complete the crushing. However, he did not do that in the end. Instead, he only relied on the stacking of the first-tier magic elves Halo to duel until now. At first, he was worried that his level was not enough to be the touchstone of the Hero Sun. He did not expect the Hero Sun's level to be lower than he expected. No. He was afraid that the previous Dake Dimeng had suddenly raised his expectations of the Hero Sun. In fact, White's level was still above average. It was just that it was not outstanding. After all, he was only a first-year student who had been enrolled for half a year. He could not ask for too much. Moreover, he heard that Brett the Hero was not a top student with good grades when he was a student. Perhaps the Hero Legacy was the same as the Fool's Academy, where it only showed its strength in the later stages. David Leonard found a reason for White as he won the match easily and won. When the referee blew the whistle and announced his victory, scattered applause could be heard from outside the venue. He suddenly felt a burst of dullness. In the audience, the seats where eldest Prince Charles and the Archbishop were originally sitting were quietly emptied. Of course, they would not arbitrarily deny a person based on his performance in the newcomers' competition. However, they might have to adjust their previously formulated plan slightly. Eldest Princess Elisha and Valkyrie Yvette did not leave the arena. Yvette was very clear about the previous Hero Sun's character when he was a student. Therefore, she was already used to it. As the saying goes, the son inherits the father's medicine. At least this year's Hero Sun did not seem to be so terrible. The eldest princess was seriously considering whether to continue competing with the Holy Church for the support of the Hero Sun. Or should she simply shift the focus of the faction to the Valkyrie's son? 3-1. It's December. Please vote. Chapter 277. This rookie competition might not make them change their intentions immediately, but it would more or less have some impact. And most of the time, the final change in direction was due to such factors. It was accumulated bit by bit. The reason why the son of the Braveheart was valued by people, other than the frequent appearance of various true or false prophecies, was that he was under the shadow of his father. Braveheart, Brett God and Valkyrie Yvette St. Dimming were known as the kingdom's twin swords. But the reputation of the Braveheart among the people was actually higher than that of the Valkyrie. On the one hand, it was because the word Braveheart was propagated, and on the other hand, it was because the Braveheart sacrificed himself in the end. Regardless of the era, the people would always have more respect for the sacrifice. Yvette's reputation was inferior to Brett's precisely because she was still alive. And if the son of the Braveheart could also become a Braveheart, he would inherit the reputation of the previous generation of Bravehearts and become a dragon. Remember the URL. Vipkanchu. 6. Therefore, the importance of the son of the Braveheart was undeniable. And at this moment, even though the son of the Braveheart's defeat was foreseeable, he still felt abnormally disappointed. He could feel that the audience had high hopes for him. Unfortunately, he could not respond to their expectations. He could only grit his teeth and think that he would definitely win the next time. When he came down from the contestant stage, White completed the exchange with the next contestant. That contestant was a second-year senior. His gaze did not contain ridicule, but was filled with sympathy. It seemed like a senior from the Knight Institute patted his shoulder and consoled him. It's not embarrassing to lose to David. But was it really not embarrassing? It could only be said that the wise and the benevolent had different views. White was dispirited in the common lounge for a long time until Luo Boat came looking for him. Didn't Doran and Justin also lose? Luo Boat's consolation was more direct than the seniors. White thought carefully and felt that this was the case, so he let it go. It was Dake's victory that gave him too much of an impact. If it was a goal, he would not be willing to accept the normal failure. As for what the audience outside the arena thought, and whether they would say some irrational things after their expectations were dashed, it didn't matter much. The Shang Malian Society was a protective blanket for the baby. As long as he did not read the newspaper, he would not be affected. After the White event, the competition continued as usual. In the 13th match at 10 o'clock, another first-year student took the stage under the watchful eyes of the crowd. AI Ma Mortis gritted his teeth slightly. After the start of the match, he used the Gold Beast as the main axis and launched a series of attacks and defenses. However, the second-year senior opposite her seemed to have done some research on her. She used a method that completely countered her and destroyed her lineup. A crushing defeat. It was an expected defeat. It was unexpectedly miserable. Without a second-tier Magic Guide sprite, they would be at a huge disadvantage when fighting against the first-year students. AI Ma summed up the experience and learned from it. After exiting the arena, he took advantage of the fact that his memory was still intact to record the entire duel. He planned to write a detailed analysis report with this as the theme. Then, it was the 16th match at 10:30. Saraswati skillfully used the Sphinx Cat, and sealed the opponent's offering with the sure kill skill, Shadow Stomp. In the end, she became the third first-year rookie to win. When the referee blew the whistle and announced the results, she waved her hand at the cheering audience and looked at the golden-haired youth in the ring as if to say, "I did it too." Humans could only move forward when they had something to pursue. Saraswati's victory was not a fluke, but the crystallization of wisdom and hard work. Professor Cheong-si, who was in the ring, nodded in satisfaction. The competition for the 7 rookies came to an end. Actually, the victory of 3 students had already made her feel very surprised. This should have been a first battle with a purpose to polish them. To let the students know that failure was equally precious. Thus, it would have a positive effect. But now, it seemed that the victories of some people seemed to have a better motivational effect. It was still all right. It was not until Saraswati's match ended that the first-year students suddenly recalled that today's rookie competition was actually a topic for everyone. They still needed to use one of the matches as a goal to analyze and summarize it. Then, which match should he aim for? Psychologically speaking, there were definitely many people who wanted to use the most exciting match as a goal to analyze and summarize it. But after careful consideration, they might choose another goal. After all, The most exciting match was also the longest and the most difficult to analyze. On the other hand, the other matches had obvious highlights and were not long. They were very friendly to the little sorcerers who focused on completing their homework. One of the most typical examples was Saraswati's match. Restricting the opponent's offering to prevent the opponent's summoning was a very effective tactic, whether it was in a competition or in actual combat. For the first-year students who lacked a high-star magic elf, it was also a way to win. Perhaps there would be topics like, what should I do if I can't summon a high-star magic elf? In short, from 11 o'clock, the first-year students left one after another. At 11:30, the eldest princess and the others also left the auditorium. Although the rookie competition was not over yet, it was no longer a rookie competition for the first-year students. Dake met up with Anna and Luo C at around 11:10 and then went to Traveller Street to celebrate. While the memory was still fresh, they went to the library in the afternoon to start writing. Dake and Anna both analyzed and summarized their own matches. Luo C chose to analyze Dake's match, which was more difficult. While analyzing, he would ask Dake questions from time to time, and Dake would answer them one by one. The learning atmosphere gradually thickened. The whole afternoon passed in a busy state. Dake, who had finished all his homework for the week, finally began to seriously think about the creation of the Sure Kill skill card. Perhaps to others, the use of the Sure Kill skill card was limited, but to him, the Sure Kill skill card was obviously very useful. It could replace the spell card to a certain extent. And the method of creating the Sure Kill skill card, in addition to the basic steps, the most important point was actually to choose a magic elf card as the target. This was because the so-called Sure Kill skill card was essentially a Sure Kill skill extracted from the magic elf card. Generally speaking, it would be a Sure Kill skill that was already in the magic elf card. If he could dig deeper, he might be able to dig out the Sure Kill skill that could be learned but had not been mastered. For example, Kettle. 99. 99% of the Kettle cards were either white or blue cards. Even if it was a blue card, there was only one Sure Kill skill, Sturdy. If he used the blue Kettle as the target, the prerequisite was that he succeeded, he would most likely be able to extract the Sure Kill skill, Sturdy. However, the magic elf that could use this Sure Kill skill, Sturdy, could only be a magic elf that had the potential to learn this Sure Kill skill. If he were to dig deeper, there was a very low probability of extracting the three godly skills, equal distribution of power, power trick, and equal distribution of defense. This way, he could make up for the shortcomings of the blue Kettle. Therefore, the Sure Kill skill card had a certain use value, but the application conditions were more stringent. Dake had not thought of which Sure Kill skill to extract as the target. However, unlike most students who did not know the use of that Sure Kill skill, he had too many targets to choose from, so he could not make a decision. Therefore, he planned to spend the whole night thinking about it and go to Traveller Street to buy materials tomorrow. At 7 o'clock in the evening, Anna and Luo C had also finished their homework, and the two of them began to think about the Sure Kill skill that they wanted to extract. Anna tilted her head and asked, "Can Bear Bond be extracted? Can it be used on other bears after it is extracted?" Dake shook his head blankly, indicating that he did not know. Luo C wanted to extract the Sure Kill skill of a magic elf called Aurora Moonrabbit, Moon Palace Chariot. The reason was that the cooldown of this Sure Kill skill was too long, a full 24 hours. Dake did not know that she had such a magic elf until now, and he was shocked at that time. Aurora Moonrabbit was a magic elf that was very popular with women and had once reached the top of the Magic Elf Beauty Contest. Legend had it that the Aurora Moonrabbit came from the moon and was the pet of a certain moon god. It was born with the aurora, and the 7-colored ribbon wrapped around its body was condensed from the aurora. Just by waving the ribbon, it could create an aurora that was like a dream. The Aurora Moonrabbit had a rare Sure Kill skill and could transform into a beauty on the moon. However, Luo C's Aurora Moonrabbit had another skill, Moon Palace Chariot. It was a kind of aurora illusion, like a mirage. It transformed into a huge and gorgeous moon palace chariot in the air, which was the legendary Moon Palace. Not only was it majestic and beautiful to the extreme, but it also had a miraculous effect on a moonlit night, causing the lives within the range of the Moon Palace chariot to receive a charm bonus and healing bonus. If it was a full moon night, it could even release healing light waves, which was an extremely powerful large-scale healing skill. In short, even if those special effects were excluded, just the ability to transform into a moon palace was enough to make Moon Palace Chariot a godly skill that everyone pursued. Dake suddenly realized the other function of the Sure Kill skill card was probably to refresh the cooldown. Some Sure Kill skills with a long cooldown could be completely skipped by refining a Sure Kill skill card. Cousin is getting married on the 5th. The update time until the 5th will be quite unstable, but it won't stop. If it's late, it'll be filled. If it's empty, it'll explode. In addition, according to the protagonist's current magic elf, which Sure Kill skills can be used or have special value. Let's brainstorm. I hope we can get an idea before the next chapter. Omega. Chapter 278. Of course, something like a Sure Kill skill was definitely not something that could be extracted just because one wanted to. Even Professor Ka Zayer, who taught them this technology, was unable to explain the key factors that determined the success rate. Deanna wanted to extract Bear's Bond. Luo C wanted to extract Moon's Palace. However, the probability of them succeeding was actually very low. After Dake thought about it carefully, he finally had some ideas. The magic guide sprites in his hands were generally divided into two systems. The first came from Digimon. The second type originated from Pokemon. As for Trash Slime, that was an unexpected product. The Digimon's Sure Kill skills were very few in common, and their versatility was very low. 1 second to remember https://m. Vipkanchu. VIP. Moreover, the Digimon in his hands were actually the Little Devil Beast and the Diru Beast. The other 7 belonged to the Pokemon series. Therefore, it was more appropriate to set the extraction target of the Sure Kill skill card within the Pokemon series. Among the Sure Kill skills that Pokemon could learn, there were some skills that were extremely versatile. Basically, other than a few types of Pokemon, they could learn all of them. Dake called them universal skills. Of course, his understanding of Pokemon was actually quite limited. Currently, after thinking about it, he could only think of 2 skills. One was rotation. The other was guard. These 2 Sure Kill skills were skills that the other 6 Pokemon could learn except for the 100 Faces monster. Among them, rotation was a team-type attack skill. It could attack the opponent through singing. If a companion used the rotation skill, not only could it be instantaneously cast, but its power would also double. From the originally inconspicuous 60, it would directly double to 120. After that, every companion would use rotation, and its power would be 120. As for the power of 120, let's give a simple example. 100,000 volts power was 90. Sunlight's power was 120. Death Ray's power was 150. Moreover, rotation could also ignore skills like substitute puppets. If rotation was a sound wave skill that was quite versatile, then the other skill, defend, was a genuine godly skill. Using guard could completely block the enemy's attack. In addition to continuous use, the success rate of each use would be reduced to about 33% of the previous success rate. It basically had no flaws. Of course, the above information came from the game description of Pokemon. In a real situation, defend might have a limit to what it could withstand. However, as an extremely versatile defensive divine skill, it was already powerful enough. It should be easier to extract vocal rotation from Chocho Sea Lion and Fairy Ibu, who have the same type of ultimate skill, bewitching voice. It should be easier to extract defend from Ivan and Big Milk Can. But the question now is, how can I extract this unlearned skill from them? Dake couldn't help but ponder. According to the teachings of Professor K. Zayer, there was a high probability that the Sure Kill skill card would extract the Sure Kill skill from the interface, and even if that was the target, it would still require some core materials that matched the skill as a guide and carrier. If the target was a Sure Kill skill that wasn't on the interface, it would be like building a pavilion in the air, which was a very stupid thing to do. I shouldn't bite off more than I can chew. The more Dake thought about it, the more unreliable he felt. Previously, someone seemed to have shown him the consequences of biting off more than one could chew. However, he couldn't remember who it was. So, it's better to lay the foundation first. After laying the foundation, I'll delve deeper into it. Moreover, it doesn't have to be suitable for a duel to choose a Sure Kill skill. It can be used in a real battle or in a real-life situation. Some Sure Kill skills can be very useful if they can be used to refresh their cooldown. 8:30 p.m. Dake returned to the dormitory. He had already released the magic guide fairies when he came back to get his homework in the afternoon. Because there was a duel today, and it was also the weekend, he gave the magic guide fairies a break and didn't give them any learning tasks. Therefore, as soon as he entered the door, the magic guide fairies were lying all over the place. In this regard, he just smiled a few times very implicitly, then put down his school bag and sat down at the desk. Then, he took out a pen and paper and wrote down all the Sure Kill skills of the magic guide fairies. Since the refining of the Sure Kill skill card required the extraction of information from the magic guide fairy card, those magic guide fairies that required the Great Sin series of magic guide cards to evolve could not be the target of extraction of the Sure Kill skill. In fact, even the spell cage, Little Devil Beast, could not be extracted. In addition, passive skills could not be extracted. Therefore, there were not many Sure Kill skills to choose from at the moment. Enhanced Gastric Acid, Feather Dance, Imitation Cat, Cat Fist, Cat's Eye Transformation, Bewitching Voice, Moon Power, Strength Equalization, Defense Equalization, Strength Trick, Drink Milk, Become Round Scroll. After listing all these possibilities, Dake's eyes lit up, and he felt that everything had become clear. Among these 14 Sure Kill skills, Transformation, combined with the original Shapeshifter characteristic of the hundreds of transformed monsters, could be said to be terrifying. Shapeshifter, using Transformation, does not consume magic power. As soon as he thought about having enough Sure Kill skill, Transformation, he could achieve a transformation without cooldown. Dake shuddered. It was not until now that he truly realized the value of the Sure Kill skill card. Professor K. Zayer is indeed the only master alchemist of the old era. Even if he changed his profession halfway, he could still establish such achievements in the field of magic guide. If this Sure Kill skill card is further refined, it may be a technology that can change the era. Dake could not help but feel more and more respect for the goblin mixed blood who was always so approachable. Moreover, after locking onto Transformation, he almost immediately thought of the materials that could be compatible with it. Without a doubt, the Fantasy Beast's hair was the most suitable core material for refining Sure Kill skill, Transformation. The only problem was that the Fantasy Beast's hair was very precious and rare. It was difficult to find even in Traveler's Street. If he wanted to obtain the Fantasy Beast's hair, it was very likely that he would need to ask Professor K. Zayer for help. If the professor still has it and is willing to sell it, then it's done. Other than Transformation, Dake also had his eyes on another skill that was slightly less valuable than Transformation, but equally extraordinary: Drink Milk. There was no need to elaborate on how powerful Big Milk Jug's Drink Milk skill was. More importantly, the core material that guided and carried this Sure Kill skill was traceable. This was completely different from Equal Distribution of Strength, Power Cantrip, and Equal Distribution of Defense, which were godly skills but could not be derived from the core material. With that in mind, Dake could not help but turn his gaze to the milkweed that was playing with the milkweed. After the juice of the milkweed was freshly squeezed through kettle pot, it would become the perfect material for refining Sure Kill skill, Drink Milk. For now, let's settle on these two Sure Kill skills. Also, I have a direction for the core material. Dake waved at the milkweed, and it moved and scurried over. Dake picked it up and placed it on his lap, gently twirling its round horns with his fingers, and could not help but laugh. Hypothetically, and it was only hypothetically, if one day, the milkweed learned how to use its own magic and mastered the normal summoning spells. And he had successfully mastered the exact method of refining sure kill skill, drink milk. Then, he could let the milkweed carry a small backpack and stuff a lot of sure kill skill, drink milk, into it. At that time, the milkweed would be like a fish swimming in the vast sea and a bird flying in the vast sky. It would have inexhaustible magic, and it would not be a problem for it to wander around the entire castle. And the magic elves that wanted to go out with the milkweed mama would have to cry for milk from the milkweed mama. Whew-hee-hee, Dake narrowed his eyes and let out a strange laugh. This made the milkweed mama puzzled. With a goal in mind, everything became smoother. He practiced underworld magic for half an hour before going to bed, and he felt that his whole body was very cute. When he woke up the next day, he was in high spirits. After the morning exercise, Dake took a hot shower and sat down in front of the desk, eating the breakfast brought by the little fiend while reading today's Great Sage Daily. Although the Great Sage Daily had all kinds of problems, it always kept up with current affairs and grasped the timeliness. This was one of the main reasons why Dake had not given up on it until now. For example, today's Great Sage Daily had a picture of him holding Fusion High on the contestant stage. There were no cameras in this world, but there were all kinds of photographic technology. And there was also a special technology to create moving pictures. In the picture, Dake even looked back at him, and then the corners of his mouth curled up. Nike smile. Dake suddenly felt a chill. He continued to read and found that it was a simple report about the new first-year duelists of the Shang Malian Academy. Every law enforcer was responsible for reporting this kind of content that directly revealed personal information in the newspaper. Dake couldn't help but frown. This report had information about 7 people. Among them, he was the leader, and his identity as Valkyrie's son and Crimson Star winner were highlighted. Next was White, son of the brave, and honorable defeat. Then Sarah, daughter of the ancient sage. So Saraswati is the daughter of the ancient sage? When Dake saw this, he couldn't help but feel very surprised. Not everyone was willing to talk about their origins. He didn't know about Sarah's background until now through this newspaper. No wonder she has such a large reserve of knowledge and can even make a secret ritual card. After being amazed, Dake continued to read. The 4th was D. Anna, with the labels Bear of the Kingdom and Pearl of the Palm. The 5th was Dolan, with the label Dolan Family. The 6th was Justin, with the label Griffin Knights. Griffin Knights. Dake's mind suddenly stirred. The Griffin Knights were one of the 5 major knight orders in the kingdom. He didn't expect Justin Wayne to be someone with a background. However, when he took a closer look, he realized that this background was completely dug out. Justin Wayne was indeed related to the Griffin Knights, but that was only because his father was a captain of one of the Griffin Knights. The last report was naturally A.I. Ma. In order to create a gimmick, the newspaper indeed linked her to the Sage of Secrets. He wondered what the Sage of Secrets would think after seeing this. According to the plot of the main female lead novel, the Sage of Secrets should be a handsome old man who doesn't age. After seeing this newspaper by chance, not only did he not get angry, but he also cherished talent and personally took in a disciple. Tisk. Dake used a little force and bit the sausage in his mouth. The gravy overflowed, and a rich fragrance suddenly exploded in his mouth. After breakfast, Dake packed his things, carried his backpack, and went out. Ever since he went there at Christmas, Dake knew the location of Professor Ka Zayer's dormitory. With the keycard left by Claire, he was unimpeded all the way and soon arrived in front of Professor Ka Zayer's dormitory. But when he raised his hand to knock on the door, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and wondered if he was too casual. At Christmas, it was fine. After all, she had brought gifts with her. But this time, there wasn't even a fruit basket. The ways of the world. Dake knocked his forehead and reflected. But he still knocked on the door of Professor Ka Zayer's dormitory. Knock, knock, knock. Who is it? Well, let me guess. Who would come to find a lonely stinky goblin like me at this time? Hearing the voice from inside the door, Dake was stunned. Even his hand that was knocking on the door froze. "Professor," he said hesitantly. But Professor Zaire was still talking to himself. "It can't be little Li, right? But other than little Li, who else could it be? Could it be little Nini? Oh no, maybe it's Hex. Could it be that his hands and feet can't hold on anymore? Or did he accidentally fall? Sigh, once a person gets old, they become useless." Even though the voice was through the door, it was very soft. But he could hear it clearly. The person who was talking was Professor Zaire, who was always very open-minded. Dake took a deep breath and felt like he came at the wrong time. "Should I come back another day? Anyway, I have a backup plan. Drink milk. For tomorrow's introduction to magic, I'll make drink milk first." Click. While he was thinking, the door in front of him suddenly opened. Professor Zaire, who was wearing dark blue pajamas and a nightcap, appeared in front of Dake. The goblin mixed blood with wrinkled skin looked up at him. His eyes were not as muddled as he had imagined. "So it's the small dimming. It's so cold this morning, why are you here?" Even though it was not obvious on the surface, Professor Zaire's behavior was obviously different from normal. Dake quickly glanced inside the room. Because of the closed entrance, his vision was limited, but he could still see that the furnishings were neat. Even though Professor Zaire was single, he was good at housekeeping. He did not seem drunk. "Don't look, I'm more awake than ever." Professor Katzel seemed to know what he was thinking, so he spoke casually. Dake could only say, "Professor, I have something to ask you." "Professor Zaire, then come in first. It's rare for someone to visit, I can't leave you outside to feel the wind." Dake wanted to say, "You didn't hesitate to send me off at Christmas." But considering that Professor Zaire's attitude was obviously not right, he was a bit more restrained. Sure enough, when Professor Zaire walked into the room, Dake immediately saw a familiar bottle on the table, the bottle of fairy wine. There was only a thin layer of wine left in the large bottle of fairy essence wine. Dake still remembered that he was drunk after 2 cups. He did not expect Professor Zaire to be able to drink the whole bottle and still be awake. That's scary. Also, who would drink so early in the morning? Dake looked around and found a book on the bedside table. It was The Old Knight of the Border. The bookmark was on the last page. It seemed that Professor Zaire had treated his Christmas gift well. Anyway, it was not a good place to stay. It was said that some people were drunk on the outside but not on the inside. They looked sober on the outside but were already drunk on the inside. Therefore, Dake simply went straight to the point. "Professor, where can I find Fantasy Beast Hair?" "You want Fantasy Beast Hair? That's easy." Professor Zaire casually pointed at the wall cabinet. A beam of magic light shot out from his fingertip, and a magic array appeared on the front of the cabinet. Then, a smaller door slowly appeared where the cabinet's door was supposed to be. The magic door opened automatically, and the inside was completely different from the cabinet's magic space. The inside of the magic space was divided by countless grids. Placed in the grids were various materials that had been shrunk down. One of the materials had a label that said, "Fantasy Beast Hair." Dake's eyes lit up. He asked, "How much is it?" Professor Zaire smiled frivolously. 1,000 credits per hair, 8 to 10 centimeters. Dake's eyelids twitched. Fantasy Beast Hair was actually this expensive? When they first made Fantasy Beast Hair, they received 2 sets of materials, which were clearly free. If they failed, they could even buy an entire pack of materials for 100 credits. 1 hair per pack. So, at that time, everyone had already made a huge profit. Dark estimated his credits and realized that the credits, which seemed to be a lot at first, would be emptied out once he used them. He took a deep breath and asked, "Can I get a discount if I buy 3 hairs? Like a 10% discount or something?" Professor Zaire smiled. "In the small dimming, if you want to get something, you have to pay a price. No one will help you for free. You can go ask little Nini how hard it is to get Fantasy Beast Hair." "Okay, I'm just giving an example." Dake paid the credits and quickly slipped out of Professor K. Zayer's dormitory. He felt that the professor had become too dangerous after drinking. If he was sober, not to mention a discount, he might even get one hair for free. But it wasn't good to always be a freeloader. Dake Dim-eng was a student with integrity. 2. 5 in 1/5200. How many votes is this character worth? Chapter 279. Walking out of the dormitory, Dake raised his head slightly. The sunlight was slanting down, illuminating his eyes. He closed his eyes and lowered his head. When he opened them again, he couldn't help but sigh. 9 out of 10 times, life was not smooth sailing. The older one got, the more regrets they had. So, adults always hoped that their children could have a happy childhood. Because once they grew up, it would be difficult to achieve. The desire to muddle along and wait for death seemed simple, but it was something most people wished for. Dake raised the transparent bag and shone it under the sunlight. The 3 transparent hairs reflected a rainbow-colored light under the sunlight. These were the hairs of the magic beast. They were the core materials used to refine Ivan and the multiform monster. As for whether or not they could be used to refine the sure kill skill, transform, that would need to be tested. First website, https://m, Vipkanchu. VIP. Originally, refining the sure kill skill card wasn't a mature technique. In order to refine the sure kill skill card, students would rack their brains to find the corresponding core materials. It was also a process of diverging thinking. Perhaps Professor K. Zayer didn't hold out much hope that the students would be able to successfully refine the sure kill skill card. It was enough for him to be able to learn more during the process of refining. Dake returned to the dormitory and carefully put away the hairs of the magic beast. Then, he went out again and ran toward Travelers Street. Because of the newcomer competition the day before, a large number of first-year students chose to purchase materials on Sunday. So, Travelers Street was full of familiar figures that day. In particular, the places where the basic materials were sold were already occupied by the first-year students. Dake spent a lot of effort to get through the line and buy all the basic materials. He bought a total of 6 sets. Based on the quality of the materials, each set was worth around 100 credits. 6 sets corresponded to 3 magic beast hairs and 3 chances to refine the sure kill skill, drink milk. After refining 6 times, if he still didn't get anything, he would choose to cut his losses. By the time he finished buying the materials, it was already 2 in the afternoon. Before returning to the dorm, Dake went to the kitty flower shop, but he left after taking a look around. It seemed that the research and development of the catnip grass had indeed encountered a technical problem. It would probably take some time and luck to make a new breakthrough. After that, he didn't stop at Travelers Street. He carried his bags and returned to his dormitory. A small portion of the materials in his hands were raw materials that had not been processed. He needed to process them according to the textbook before he could use them in class. In addition, he also needed to extract at least 3 bottles of milkweed juice. Today was destined to be a busy and fulfilling day. The next day, Monday, Professor Shi Erfu took the opportunity to talk about ritual summoning in the summoning class and praised Elsie Kevin's ritual summoning in the newcomers competition. Soon after, it was time for the second class. The long-awaited magic conducting class had finally arrived. Now that I think about it, the last experimental class seems to have been a long time ago. Diana's tone was filled with excitement. Her victory in the newcomers competition had earned her a total of 150 credits. She had spent a lot of money on the materials. When most of the students were running out of credits, Diana could be said to be proud of her success. However, when she turned her head and saw the bags beside Dake's seat, she felt ashamed. She couldn't help but say in surprise, Dake, how many sets did you buy?" Dake made a number with his hand. Diana covered her mouth. "Can you finish them in one class?" Dake said lightly, "Continue after class." Then he added, "While it's hot." Professor K. Zayer came to the classroom a few minutes early. He waved his magic wand and said a few words to the students. His wrinkled face was full of kindness. He was like a completely different person compared to yesterday's drunk state. People said that drunkenness reveals a person's heart. Perhaps he also had a cold side hidden in his heart. However, everyone had multiple sides. A single personality would only appear in novels, comics, or movies to emphasize the character's uniqueness. Ding ding ding. The bell that rang punctually for class was like a dividing line that separated the inside and outside of class. No matter how heavy their thoughts were outside of class, they couldn't help but calm down when they were in class. Professor Zayer knocked on the blackboard and said slowly, "I'm not the only one researching the crafting technique of the Sure Kill skill card. However, everyone's research progress and results are different. Therefore, what I teach is different from what other magisters teach. If any of you can master this technique of mine, you can call yourself my student if someone asks in the future." As soon as he finished speaking, the students below the stage began to whisper among themselves. The students that Professor Zayer spoke of were clearly different from the students in the academy sense. That kind of relationship was like the relationship between Claire and Dake. It was a master and disciple in the personal sense. There was an inheritance of techniques, so it was much more intimate. Although he looked like an old goblin, Professor Zayer's reputation was very big outside. As the only master alchemist of the old era, as long as you mention his name, you would receive a lot of benefits. Even a practical young sage like Claire couldn't compare to Professor Zayer's prestige in the academic world. To be recognized as a student by him was clearly an honor. For a moment, everyone became excited. Even Dake couldn't help but become more serious. He had a good relationship with Professor Zayer, but there was still a clear dividing line between the two of them. If he could become a student recognized by the professor, then that dividing line could be slightly dissolved. Among all the professors in the first year, Professor Zayer was the one he respected the most. Sometimes, he would even subconsciously position him as an amiable grandfather. After a short pause, Professor Zayer continued, "Then we will now begin to review and deepen the content of the previous lesson. Remember to take notes." After he finished speaking, he tapped the chalk with his magic wand and an alchemy array appeared on the chalk. After a moment, the chalk turned into a golem under the effect of alchemy. He gently waved his magic wand and the chalk jumped up and began to write on the blackboard. This understated scene made Dake, who was in the back row, stunned. He couldn't help but complain, "Since you have this kind of technique, why do you have to stand on a stool and write on your toes? Maybe you don't want to show off. Maybe you want to be one with a pen and write by yourself. Who knows?" In short, with the previous encouragement, the student's attitude when taking notes was clearly a lot more correct. It didn't matter if you understood or not, just copy the notes first. After about half an hour, the theoretical knowledge review and the specific steps of the demonstration were completed. The students had an hour to concentrate on their experiments. At a glance, you would find that most of the students only prepared one set of materials. At most, they prepared more consumable materials. But as the core of the expensive materials, there were usually only one or two different materials. After all, with their level of knowledge, it was difficult to determine what the core material of a certain killing move was, so they had to prepare one or two more materials. Dake prepared magic beast hair and kettle brand milk grass juice. Anna prepared a piece of nail that was said to be the claw of a bear-type monster. Luo C prepared a piece of shell from a small shellfish that belonged to the tortoise. The shell was decorated with colorful crystals that glowed under the sunlight. During the preparation stage, Dake couldn't help but take advantage of the last row to observe the other students' materials. He was more interested in AI Ma, but AI Ma's sitting posture was very upright. From his angle, he could only see a piece of golden light. This reminded Dake of the Christmas gift that AI Ma gave him, an ancient gold coin. Where did she find so many ancient gold coins? Dake's face darkened. Even if she wanted to spend money, she couldn't spend money like this, right? Dake withdrew his gaze from AI Ma and naturally looked at Luo Boat and White, who were also in the last row. Because in the last 2 weeks, The two of them seemed to have suddenly grown up and stopped pranking in class, so they were able to accumulate credits. Although they were still short of money and the quality of the materials was questionable, they had finally gathered enough for this experiment class. Dake glanced slightly and saw a pile of mechanical parts on Luo Boat's table. He didn't know what skill he was trying to extract. On White's table, there was a small bottle of dark red liquid. It seemed to be blood that had been refined. It was a bit hard to understand. Let's go our separate ways. Dake shook his head and then focused his attention on the preparation of the experiment. There were three most important refining arrays in the refining of the Sure Kill skill card. The first one's function was identification. The second one's function was reading. The third one's function was reconstruction. These three core refining arrays were all adjusted by Professor Ka-Zayer and were specially made to deal with the Sure Kill skill. They were not numbered and were not even publicly released. Most of the students didn't realize the preciousness of these refining arrays. They just followed the steps that Professor Ka-Zayer wrote on the blackboard and started to make them bit by bit. Starting from boiling the potion and processing the materials, although there were inevitable mistakes along the way, it was much smoother than last semester's refining experiment. After all, the students who were able to enter the Shang Malian Academy were all above the baseline in terms of magical talent. Even an idiot like Deanna had a very high magical talent. And an idiot like Luo Boat was actually very good in terms of the coordination of muscles and magical power. When used in magical experiments, the efficiency and control of magical power were higher than that of ordinary people. As for a talented person like White who was well-rounded in every aspect, there was no need to mention it. Professor Ka-Zayer patrolled back and forth in the classroom and couldn't help but nod in satisfaction. The student's growth was visible to the naked eye. As a professor, he also felt a sense of accomplishment. Soon, he came to Dake's side. He only woke up after noon yesterday. Then he recalled Dake's visit. When he thought about how he sold the fur of the fantasy beast to the students for 1,000 credits each, Professor Ka-Zayer couldn't help but want to cover his head. Headache. In the past, he was proud of his special ability to stay sober after getting drunk. Now, he wished that he was the kind of person who would pass out after getting drunk. Although the price of 1,000 credits each was the market price, and most of them were priceless, he was a professor after all. He would get a discount when he sold them to the students. Basically, 1,000 credits could buy 3 hairs. But what was sold was like spilled water, and it couldn't be taken back. Therefore, he was already thinking about how to return the extra 2,000 credits Dake paid. What does he need? Professor Ka-Zayer couldn't help but stop beside Dake. In his eyes, Dake's talent in magical experiments was very high, or it could be said that his talent in alchemy was very high. If it was in the previous era, he would definitely have accepted him as an alchemy apprentice. But in this era, alchemy was a thing of the past. Sometimes, he thought that it was better not to mislead the students. Things like Underworld God Spell, which was used to build the foundation, could be taught. But if he taught too many complicated things from other systems, it was likely that he wouldn't be able to get rid of the students. This was because there were conflicts in some core concepts between different systems. When he changed his profession from an alchemist to an archmage, he spent a lot of effort to change his perception. It was unknown when it started. Dake no longer felt restrained about Professor Ka-Zayer standing behind him and observing him. His operation was as smooth as ever. When he encountered some unavoidable mistakes, he was able to correct them in time. More than 6 times the amount of basic materials gave him the margin to redo it. In about 10 minutes, his table was already filled with all kinds of materials, placed in various plates, beakers, petri dishes, and test tubes. This time, he still used a very extravagant blank magic card that cost 50 credits each. The next 10 minutes. The blank magic card was already covered with all kinds of materials, stacked layer by layer until it was half a finger high. He drew the number 7 refining array on top of the materials, and then used the magic pen to press down on the center of the array bit by bit. The whole stack of materials was gradually refined and integrated into the magic card bit by bit. When this process was over, Dake's forehead was already covered with a thin layer of sweat. He put down the magic pen, took a towel from the side, wiped the sweat off his forehead, and then began the next step, drawing the 3 core refining arrays. These 3 refining arrays had to be drawn in one go, and the requirements for precise control of magic were not low. Many students would fail miserably in this part. But for Dake, whose magic level increased with the number of days, this was not too difficult. Only half a minute later, the 3 refining arrays were perfectly drawn. Then, he injected magic to activate them. 3 beautiful light arrays popped out in an instant. Identify, read, reconstruct. Dake took out the Monster of Variety magic card and was about to put it on Identify, when he suddenly had an idea and whispered to the monster. Can you repeatedly recall the feeling when you transform in your mind? Busy? 2 in 14/150. I was going to write all night, but I didn't expect to fall asleep as soon as I leaned on the chair. Today's update will be done before 6 in the morning. Chapter 280. Identify, read, reconstruct. This was the temporary name of the 3 core refining arrays of the Sure Kill skill card. It was used when it was refined. In order to refine the Sure Kill skill card, one had to first identify the Sure Kill skill from the Magic Elf card, then read the identified Sure Kill skill, and finally construct the read Sure Kill skill in the Magic Elf card. In the entire process, Identify was the leader. Once it could not be identified, everything would be for naught. In order to identify the desired Sure Kill skill from the Magic Elf card, one had to place the core material that matched the Sure Kill skill on the Reconstruct refining array to guide it. In the end, one needed to use this material as the core to reconstruct it. This was a circular process. After understanding this process, it would be easier to discover that the so-called Identify, Read, and Reconstruct were a set of disk reading programs. And the Magic Elf card was a USB drive. Remember the URL vipcanchu. VIP Identify was a search. Search for content related to the Sure Kill skill from the USB drive. The Sure Kill skill that was already on the interface was like a document placed in a folder. The Sure Kill skill that was not on the interface but had the potential to be learned was a hidden document that had gone through layers of encryption. The difficulty of searching for the two was naturally different. Moving the document of the Sure Kill skill from the depths of the folder to the front would make it easier to be searched. In other words, it was to let the Magic Elf card extract this part of the memory from the depths of the mind to the surface. That was recall. Recall the memory of releasing the Sure Kill skill. Other magic elves might not be able to do this. However, every one of Dake's magic elves could do it. And it was very easy. After receiving Dake's order, the monster in the card could not help but recall the scene when it first met its master and transformed into its master's head. At this moment, Dake had not even put in the magic illusion beast hair into the reconstruct, and the Identify refining array had already lit up. This was the sign of a Sure Kill skill being recognized. This is, Professor Zayer, who was standing behind Dake, couldn't help but have a change in expression. Dake's actions were a little out of his expectations, but when he considered that Dake's magic guiding fairies had intelligence levels higher than 3, such actions seemed normal again. But that was something that even he could not replicate. This is not universal. A technology that transcended eras and could change eras had to be universal. Whether it was the Merlin array, Dalton array, or Demeter array, they were all like this. Even the Arvet refining array had a certain degree of universality. However, if the Sure Kill skill card array required the support of the Magic Fairy's high intelligence, then it could only be an exclusive array for personal use. Unless high IQ could also be popularized. This thought flashed through Professor Zayer's mind before he threw it into the trash can. How could it be so easy to popularize a technology that many archmages yearned for? If it could be popularized, the entire magical engineering era would be overturned. Professor Zayer couldn't help but continue to observe Dake's experiment. After the Identify array lit up slightly, Dake still placed the magic beast hair on the reconstruct array. After that, he poured in magic power to guide and fine-tune it. This allowed the identify, read, and reconstruct arrays to light up one after another. Once the light stabilized, he could remove the magic guiding fairy card from the identify array and adjust the arrays so that the three arrays would shrink together. Finally, he placed the rest of the materials on the reconstruct array and slowly refined it bit by bit. It was like boiling bone soup. The core ingredient was the bones, but it also needed other ingredients. This step was more difficult than imagined. Because there was no precise refining formula, the type and quantity of materials to put into the array, as well as the quality and so on, had to be controlled by oneself. Even a senior magus would find it difficult to do it perfectly, let alone a first-year magus. Therefore, the original purpose of this class, which was the so-called experience, was to let the little magus have a preliminary understanding of the advanced refining method. At the same time, Professor Zayer might have thought of using them as guinea pigs. Children's ideas were the most imaginative. Perhaps from their actions, one could find the method and opportunity to perfect the refining method. While still in the process of refining, Professor Zayer discovered that Dake's Sure Kill skill card had failed. Although it might have been barely formed in the end, it was still a failed Sure Kill skill card. He narrowed his eyes slightly and continued to watch. As he expected, Dake had already discovered that something was wrong when he was at the end of the refining. The experience gained from studying Curse Cage and Fusion told him that there was a mistake in the refining this time. However, at this point in the refining, there was no turning back. He could only continue. 2 minutes later, after all the materials were refined, the refining array was also collected into the magic card. A strange black shadow gradually appeared on the surface of the card. It looked very similar. Dake was a little hesitant. However, he still used tweezers to pick up the magic card and rinsed it. Then, he took out Fantasy Beast, Strange Creature, and prepared to experiment. At this time, many people in the classroom were already looking over. Although he sat in the corner of the last row, he still could not escape the attention of the students. Even if only one person found out about it, the news would spread like wildfire and spread like wildfire. Soon, everyone in the classroom knew that Dake Dim-ing was once again the first to complete the refining of the magic card. In the name of Dake Dim-ing, I summon Fantasy Beast, Strange Creature. After a quick chant, a cute lavender elf appeared on the table. Dake picked up the Sure Kill skill card that had just been refined and activated it with the usual summoning spell. As the Sure Kill skill card emitted a white light that gradually intensified, the strange creature's body gradually emitted a light of a similar frequency. Poof! The strange creature became Crooked Dake. Lying on the table, with only one face that had completed the transformation of bean-eyed Crooked Dake, Dake could not help but laugh. Oh! Anna and Luo C, who turned around from the front row, also quickly covered their mouths and could not help but laugh. The students nearby could not help but tiptoe to take a look. Then, they all laughed. The classroom was gradually filled with cheerful laughter. Then, boom! Someone's pincer exploded. Wah! Screams suddenly sounded. Professor Zayer quickly waved his magic wand and water from the sky extinguished the flames. However, the unknown liquid that flowed out of the pincer had already corroded the table. A strong stench suddenly exploded. Open the window, open the window. The students screamed crazily. Whether they were smelled or not, they were all screaming crazily. The Aristocrat Academy students by the window quickly opened the window to let the stench out. Oh my God, my dear God, what did you put in there? The students in the front row of white could not help but scream. Their screams were also drowned out by the noise. No one cared who caused the explosion. They only knew that screaming was really fun. When the classroom calmed down a little, Dake shook his head slightly, picked up a pen, and recorded the ratio of materials that he had refined this time. He was going to make adjustments when he went back. There was not enough time left to do another experiment. He felt that his overall operation was not bad. The main problem was that he needed to improve on the details. However, The degree of deviation of the failed product in his hand was greater than it seemed on the surface. This was because the transformation extracted from the failed product did not copy the data. It was the kind of transformation that only changed the shape, and it was incomplete. Originally, he thought that the polymorph only had one sure kill skill, transformation. As long as it succeeded, it would definitely be extracted. He did not expect, "Maybe there's something wrong with my thinking." Dake recalled what he said when he asked the polymorph to recall the feeling of transformation. He thought for a while. But these are all small problems. This experiment has basically verified that asking the magic fairy to recall sure kill skills will help in the refinement of the sure kill skill card. If I draw inferences from one case, does it mean that if I ask the magic fairy to recall sure kill skills that are not on the interface but have learned in the skull, it will be able to extract sure kill skills that are not on the interface? This is a very good experiment direction. Dake quickly recorded his thoughts in case he forgot. After that, he stretched out his hand to tease the polymorph and began to clean up the remnants of the experiment. Busy, busy. The polymorph smiled crookedly. It stretched out its tentacles, transformed them into hands, and began to help clean up. A few minutes later, everything was cleaned up. Dake leisurely observed the other students. The progress of the students' experiments was uneven, but they were not particularly fast. Some students' progress was so slow that it was obvious that they had to wait until after class. Some students were quite fast, but it seemed that they had not mastered the core of the sure kill skill card. After Anna and Luo C finished laughing, they hurriedly threw themselves into their own experiments. That moment of distraction almost caused their experiment to go down the drain. And on the other side, Luo Boat's experiment was surprisingly better than White's. White was trying to salvage the exploded pincer pot with a panicked expression. AI Ma's ancient gold coins were missing by 1 or 2. Ring, ring, ring. When the bell rang for the end of class, the students could not help but howl in grief. Those who failed their experiments happily carried their backpacks to the cafeteria. Those who did not fail their experiments were eagerly waiting for their experiments to fail. This experiment class was destined to have a strong start but a weak finish. No one succeeded in the entire class. After the potions class in the afternoon, Dake took advantage of the fact that Professor Thompson was still there and rushed up with his notebook. He asked all the questions he had about potions in the morning's experiment class. Thompson could be said to be the most normal professor in the first year. He put down the textbook in his hand and patiently explained. Dake listened while taking notes. A few key words could form a paragraph. After about 10 minutes, he obtained the knowledge he wanted. After that, he did not bother the professor anymore and tried to figure it out himself. That afternoon, he did not go straight to the library. Instead, he went back to his dorm and started the experiment. Learning from the lesson in the Magic Guide class, he communicated with the polymorph monster in detail before the experiment. He asked it to remember the feeling of the transform skill and not its normal transformation. This time, the experiment went quite smoothly, but the final result was still not satisfactory. Dake summoned the little devil monster and asked the polymorph monster to follow the transform skill. But after the transformation, the polymorph monster released a small dart that was soft and its attributes were obviously lower. It was obvious that the transform skill was not 100% effective. There's a difference between a complete and incomplete skill card. This discovery made Dake very depressed. But after thinking about it, it seemed to make sense. He once again recorded the various steps of the experiment. This time, he was going to use the materials of the milk can to practice. Anyway, the core materials of the milk can were endless. After deducting the cost of the core materials, a material pack only cost 100 credits. He could do more in-depth research through repeated experiments. Moo moo. The milk can stretched its head out and rubbed Dake's palm. Then, it rubbed its hands together and rubbed out a bottle of milk. It intimately handed its milk to Dake. Dake drank it in one gulp. He was full of energy. Then, he started a new experiment. With the previous 2 experiments as a foundation, The process of this experiment was relatively smooth. The milk can's recall was also very accurate. The result was a success. Finally, a sure kill skill, drink milk card was created. Dake immediately experimented with it. Although the sure kill skill card this time was also flawed, it could restore 1/3 of the mana value, which was already very good. Drink milk and transform were, after all, different types of skills. After the effect of drink milk was reduced, it was still significant. After the effect of transform was reduced, it became a sludge monster. Dake continued to work hard and completed the remaining 2 experiments in one go. In the end, the second sure kill skill, drink milk, failed, but the third sure kill skill, drink milk, was a success. It could restore about 2/5 of the mana value, which was very close to 1/2 of the strongest effect. Unfortunately, at this time, he only had one basic material pack left in his hand. Moreover, the ingredients for transformation were different from the ingredients for milk drinking. I bought too little. Doc sighed, looking as if he still wanted to continue. He slightly raised his head and noticed that it was already 9:30 at night. Happy times were always short-lived. He even forgot to eat dinner. Wait for Friday. Dake did not continue to experiment on the Transform Sure Kill skill card. Instead, he analyzed and summarized the steps and results of the Drink Milk Sure Kill skill card. He was going to wait until Friday to buy more materials and perfect the Sure Kill skill, Drink Milk. Then, he would restart the Sure Kill skill, Transform, refining experiment. In the blink of an eye, it was Tuesday. Dake was still immersed in the research of the Sure Kill skill card, but a new storm was coming. During Tuesday's duel class, Professor Cheong-si praised the 7 duelists and collected all the homework. Then, she put the thick pile of homework aside and began to explain the 7 duels one by one. The order of the explanation was according to the order of the duels. Doran, who bore the brunt of it, was completely stunned. Everyone said that it was a good start, and he also had a good start. It was the red in blood. Clearly, he had forgotten about the rookie duel after he finished his analysis paper. However, Professor Cheong-si brought it up again, reminding him of the crushing defeat in the rookie duel. Although it was not to the extent of being publicly sentenced, he still pursed his lips and clenched his fists. Next time, I must win it back. Sob. Professor Cheong-si's analysis was naturally much better than the first-year students. After Doran's initial mood tantrum, he was immersed in a few words. He had a deep and simple understanding of his mistakes in the debut battle. In the homework he had just handed in, he blamed most of his defeat on the fact that he did not have a second-tier magic guide sprite. Although that was also a big reason. However, he did not do his best in that duel. Professor Cheong-si finally concluded, when Doran went on stage, he did not think of winning. This is the biggest problem. These merciless words made little Doran's face turn pale. However, Professor Cheong-si was not a soft person. This was also her teaching characteristic. I've always said that you have to look at victory and defeat with a normal heart. Don't be arrogant if you win, and don't be discouraged if you lose. Every victory or defeat was a baptism for him. Absorbing experience and becoming stronger is the fate of a duelist. A duelist who doesn't want to win is not a good duelist. Professor Cheong-si's teaching was powerful and resonant. While Doran's face was pale, white Gouda, who was in the last row of the classroom, also turned white. Professor Cheong-si's criticism of Doran not only pierced through Doran's heart, but it also crossed dimensions and pierced White's heart full of holes. White, what's wrong? Luo Boat saw that his expression was not right and hurriedly asked. White was in a daze for a moment before he subconsciously said, "Nothing." Luo Boat, "Hey, you don't look like you're fine." White forced a smile. "Look at my gorgeous smile. The weather today is so good." Luo Boat, wouldn't it be better to use handsome to describe your smile?" White. In any case, Luo Boat's joke still made White feel a little better. He widened his eyes and continued to listen to the lecture. It was drizzling outside the window, and the sound of writing could be heard inside the window. After Professor Cheong-si finished analyzing Doran's duel, he began to analyze Anna's duel. The students listened more and more seriously. 2 and 5 in 1, 5,000, 5,000, 1,000 more than 4,000. Chapter 281. Anna's duel was outstanding. On the surface, it seemed that she won because her deck was good enough. However, the calmness and quick-wittedness she showed during the duel was not something an ordinary person could compare with. If one had not seen her duel, they would not have thought that the little fool who usually looked silly could perform so well. After Anna, Professor Cheong-si also analyzed Justin Wayne's duel. This bright young man from the Academy of Knights had his own unique tactics and mentality. The only reason that stopped him from winning was that the quality of his magic cards could not keep up with the quality. Professor Cheong-si did not criticize him because of his defeat. Instead, she gave him a lot of praise. Basically, she used her own words and actions to practice her attitude towards winning and losing. After the students' expectations, Professor Cheong-si finally began to analyze Daiming's duel. Many students actually wanted to analyze this duel, but due to their limited ability or some other reasons, they chose to analyze other subjects. This time, Professor Cheong-si personally explained it, so that the students could keep their interest and learn more. However, her explanation this time did not focus on the strength of Dake's deck or anything else. Instead, she only analyzed it from the duel's techniques to a certain extent. Remember, https://m Vipkanchu. VIP, beginners often make a mistake in a duel, and that is, they are used to using all the magic cards they have in their hands. It's best if they can suppress the opponent, but if they can't, it's very likely that they'll be wiped out. So in a duel, it is very important to learn how to preserve one's cards. Daiming's performance in this duel was very good. It is worth learning from. After choosing some words to say, Professor Cheong-si changed to another angle. In addition, today I would like to take this opportunity to talk about the command of the magic elves in a duel. As everyone knows, the intelligence level of the magic elves is only 2. 5. They do not have a complete thinking circuit. Most of their movements require the command of a magus. Although there is a delay in the process of issuing orders, receiving them, and then carrying them out, the magic elves usually fight head-on. But the importance of command is still undeniable. Many people are used to shouting orders when giving orders, as if that's the only way for the magic elf to hear them. But in fact, we have another way of commanding that is more gentle. Professor Cheong-si took out a magic card and placed it between his index and middle fingers, showing it to the students. She then rubbed her 2 fingers together, and the magic card began to spin on her fingertips. A pink, light, balloon-like magic elf shot out from the card and appeared in the air. In this duel, Daiming has used this method many times. This is my float. Floaty Yo was a type of ornamental magic guide sprite with 0 attack and defense. Professor Cheong-si blew at the float, and it wobbled and flew above the students' heads. Professor Cheong-si held the magic card firmly, and injected a trace of magic into her fingertips. She put the float card to her lips and whispered a few words, and the float flew in a heart shape in the air. She said, using this method, you only need to use magic to draw a special magic array on the magic card, and then continue to inject magic into it. The magic card can be used as a relay station, and through speaking to the magic card, the magic guide sprite on the magic card can receive orders. The advantage of this method of commanding is that you can command the magic guide sprite from afar, and you don't have to worry about your tactics being leaked. The disadvantage is that it requires a lot of magic to maintain. For magi who don't have enough magic, they can use it selectively to protect the secrecy of their tactics. Dake didn't expect his little secret to be exposed so quickly. He leaned back in his chair and sighed slightly. In fact, this method of commanding was written in the textbook of dual class, but it hadn't been taught yet. He had only previewed and mastered it in advance. After all, shouting in a duel was sometimes hot-blooded, but it made him look like an idiot. Only when one's emotions had reached a point where they would naturally shout out loud. Otherwise, he didn't like that kind of meaningless shouting. Using the aristocratic way of explaining it, it was too inelegant. As for his magic, at this moment, his magic power wasn't inferior to that of an adult archmage. In the duel with Elsie Kevin, Dake frequently used this method to issue very detailed orders to the magic guide sprites. For example, the timing of Kettle's killing move, the reminder of Diru Beast's dodging, and so on. Of course, there were also times when he couldn't help but shout, just like Changeable Monster's transformation. He was able to win the duel with Elsie Kevin because of a combination of many factors, and it wasn't just a card deck advantage in the eyes of some people. In the analysis paper of his own duel, Dake emphasized the advantages of this method of commanding. After explaining Dake's duel, Professor Cheong-si continued to explain the duels of White, Ai Ma, and Sarah. This duel class came to an end. There was no homework today. Then, the second class on Tuesday morning, the nightmarish arithmetic class struck again. Professor Li put away the test papers 5 minutes before the class started. Then, she flipped through them and found that all the papers were filled in. She nodded with satisfaction and continued with her math class. However, except for the students of the Aristocratic Academy and a few of the top students, most of the students didn't even have a good foundation. It was impossible for them to understand more in-depth classes. This reality could only be understood when Professor Li personally graded the homework this time. Tuesday afternoon's History of Magic. Professor Ryan Hacks seemed to have tried to look for history books. For the first time, he began to talk about history before modern times. He actually looked like a professor of history of magic. Wednesday morning's potionology class. Professor Thompson taught a potion called melanin soup. It was said to be the gospel of the night watchers. It could help people stay awake at night. The boy's eyes widened and he listened to the class attentively. It seemed that with this melanin soup, hundreds of millions of rounds were no longer a dream. After that, in the summoning class, Professor Shi Erfu explained in more detail the common summoning and sacrificial summoning spells, especially the sacrificial summoning spell. She gave out the summoning cards for practice and let the students practice on their own. Then, she personally taught them. Even Dake benefited a lot. Just by correcting a key point, he made a breakthrough in his sacrificial summoning spell. It had to be said. After all, there was a lack of knowledge in the textbooks. Studying could not cover everything. The personal teaching of the professors was better than studying for a month. After a week of reincarnation, it was finally time for astronomy again. The little magisters still remembered the prophecy from last week, especially the prophecy homework, which left a deep impression on them. Fortunately, the noble house had Dake, the notebook maniac, but the other academies were not so lucky. They all racked their brains and racked their brains. As for whether or not the prophecy was missing a word, they could only ask the heavens. But when it came to homework, it was already over. None of this could change the interest of astronomy. I wonder what Professor Mitya Bartholomew will talk about in tonight's astronomy class? I guess it's the stars. I like the moon better. According to astronomy, the moon is one of the stars, right? I don't care. The moon is the moon, and the stars are the stars. After dinner, the little magisters rushed to the 12th floor of the spiral clock tower one after another. The 12th floor of stairs was indeed a torturous climb for the students. Just like how they felt at the moment, mixed with anticipation for astronomy class and rejection of the homework. Before 7:30 in the evening, the sky was already dark. A dim moon was curled up in the distant sky. Although it was not so dark that they could not see their fingers, it was still difficult to see the road ahead. If not for the railings of the spiral staircase being sturdy enough and giving off a very reliable feeling, there would definitely be people with acrophobia. The little magisters either summoned their magic fairy or used magic cards to illuminate the front and slowly walked up. Dake leisurely followed the crowd, holding the magic card, Illusory Beast, Ivan, in his hand. Tonight, he still brought little Ivan with him. Yee-yee-yee. After entering the astronomy classroom, the students sat in their usual seats. Then, They began to discuss and speculate with anticipation. It was only when the cuckoo bird drilled out of the wall clock that someone suddenly realized that Professor Mitya Bartholomew was late again. Right at the top of the clock tower, a witch dressed as usual sat in a pumpkin carriage that blended into the night. She lifted the curtain and looked down at the castle. A voice came from beside her. "Mitya, why are you always late?" Mitya's voice carried a natural and strong charm. Being a little late can increase people's expectations. If you are always on time, it will not be beautiful. "I understand," the voice helplessly said. "It is a bad habit of the prophets." Mitya could not help but cover her mouth and chuckle. "You are right. Well, hide, I am going down." Then there was no sound in the carriage. The pumpkin carriage was pulled by two black beasts. It drilled out of the curtain of night and put on a bright color, as if it was a carriage that came out of a fairy tale. The students in the classroom had already opened their eyes wide and looked up. As the ceiling became transparent, the pumpkin carriage came into view. Mitya passed through the two sides of the ceiling and drove the carriage to the podium. Then she lifted the curtain and leaned out of the carriage, making people's hearts tremble. "Ladies and gentlemen, good evening." With a charming smile, the witch took off her pointed witch hat, letting her soft black and purple hair fall down like a waterfall. The ends of her long hair were slightly curled, with a trace of playfulness. Mitya took out her magic wand from her witch hat and stretched out her hand to touch the carriage. The carriage disappeared along with the rising smoke. Then she put her hat on the table and said, "This week, I am 1 minute earlier than last week. This is an improvement. As long as the foundation is low enough, you can always improve." Hearing Mitya's words, Dake could not help but have black lines appear on his face. Although this professor was a real talent, her character did not seem to be reliable. Then, the first question, "Who am I?" Professor Mitya Bartholomew tapped her magic wand. In the classroom, a boy raised his hand high. The boy looked at Professor Mitya with eyes full of passion, and he said fanatically, "You are the guide of fate, the diviner of the eyes of the stars, the witch of the silver moon, and the lover of my dreams, Mitya Bartholomew." "You are very correct," Professor Mitya said without the slightest anger. "Brad Gunter deducts 10 points. Also, I feel that it is not suitable for you to dream recently." Then she blinked her eyes, and the boy from the Knights department was stunned. A purple crescent mark appeared on his forehead. The crescent mark was surrounded by a black pattern, as if it wanted to lock something. Brad Gunter subconsciously touched his forehead with a dumbfounded expression. However, Professor Mitya only waved her wand, and he sat down on the floor. "Pa!" A loud sound was heard. The sound was so loud that it seemed like the chair was going to crack. Professor Mitya continued with a calm face, "The moon tonight is very round. It is the time when the trajectory of fate is the most obvious. Among you, has anyone tried divination before?" But at this time, the students in the audience were shocked by Brad Gunter's encounter. Of course, no one knew whether the shock was mixed with fear or gloating. Saraswati raised her hand. "Professor, I have tried divination with stones, but that was when I was young." Mitya nodded. Although stone divination is a small trick, it can be used to predict good or bad luck. Ai Ma Métis was not willing to be left behind. "Professor, I have tried gold coin divination, but it is not very accurate." Mitya smiled and said, "I've been doing this for a long time, but the simpler the steps, the higher the requirement for the fortune teller. Wait until you finish my astronomy class. Maybe you'll be able to do it more accurately." Then she slightly moved her eyebrows and looked at White Gouda in the back row. "We have experienced all kinds of interesting things in our childhood. So, hero's son, please answer me. Have you played similar divination games in your childhood?" White was stunned for a moment, then he stood up and shook his head. "Sorry, Professor. I have not played any divination games." The witch's hat on the table shook slightly. Mitya changed the topic. "That is not a problem. Today, our topic is to observe the moon." She waved her magic wand, and the closed ceiling opened again. A few minutes ago, the moon was still dim, but now it was abnormally bright. Under the moonlight, there were many shadows. Chapter 282. The students raised their heads to look at the sky in shock. Not only was the moonlight dim when they climbed up the spiral staircase. When Professor Midya drove the pumpkin carriage into the classroom from the ceiling, they also saw that the moon in the sky was not bright. But in such a short time, the night sky seemed to have been replaced with a curtain. The moon in the center of the composition became big and round. This gave people the illusion that Professor Midya had used a method to change the sky and earth. Dark squinted his eyes as he observed the moon, deep in thought. Since ancient times, many so-called miracles had been displayed like this. But in reality, it was very likely that it was a natural phenomenon of the clouds scattering and the moon appearing. It was just that Professor Midya had grasped the timing of the phenomenon's change. A qualified prophet could always grasp all kinds of opportunities to show themselves. Website https://m Vipkanchu. VIP. Most of the time, their prophecies were not real divinations. They relied on their profound knowledge to accurately speculate about various phenomena. After all, every time they did a divination, they had to pay a high price. If they did a divination every time they encountered an event, then the real prophets should have been extinct. Dake vaguely remembered that a famous magician once said that the core of magic was actually acting skills. Every brilliant magician was a qualified actor. And after he gradually understood the profession of prophets, he realized that the so-called prophets were all actors. Thinking about it this way, little Ivan, who was proficient in the ultimate skill, imitation, was a natural prophet? Little Ivan, who was in the magic card, looked at the night sky under Dake's poking. His little face was full of curiosity. Suddenly, a water-like transparent film appeared on the open ceiling. Strange rays of light shot out from the four boundaries, splitting the moonlight into small, densely packed pieces, which were projected in front of everyone. Professor Midya waved her magic wand and used a special magic to adjust it. On the table of each student, a small piece of the night sky appeared. The bright moon rose and fell in the clouds. Clouds gathered and scattered. Sometimes it was submerged in the clouds. Sometimes it was showing its beauty. The students all revealed looks of astonishment. Their attention shifted from the bright moon in the sky to the projection on the table. At first glance, it was as if the scene in the sky had been transferred to the table. People couldn't help but reach out their hands to carefully touch and hold it. They were so excited that their fingers trembled slightly. This miraculous projection magic was far beyond the reach of ordinary people. It was as if the moon in the well and the flower in the mirror were truly astonishing. So beautiful. The girls' voices were filled with joy. Although the boys didn't make a fuss, they were all inexplicably excited. Humans were just that emotional. The moon is an especially important part of the stars. Since ancient times, people have observed the stars and worshipped the sun and moon because the stars have divine power. Deducing fate from the orbits of the stars is part of astrology. Professor Midya's voice was like flowing water in a quiet forest. Her words penetrated one's heart and made one remember them unconsciously. Our topic tonight is to deduce the future from the moon and perform divination. Now, let's observe the moon carefully. Yes, Ai Ma Métis. Is there a problem? Ai Ma raised her hand and said, Professor, isn't there a specific method? Something like a spell? Midya couldn't help but squint and smile. Yes, of course there is. But it's not something that can be done by beginners. What we need now is to find that little bit of feeling first. She raised her hand and hooked her thumb and index finger into a ring, indicating slightly. In fact, divination was a talent. Some people were born with knowledge. Some people were born with divine eyes. If they could see it, they could do it. If there was no need for more than a talent, it would be impossible to see it. But the potential of the human brain was difficult to guess. The talent related to this could not be directly expressed like magic power. Therefore, it was difficult to determine whether a person had the talent for divination or not. This gave more room for imagination. Some so-called prophets relied on such a pitiful obsession to survive until old age, but in the end, they achieved nothing and could only rely on acting and deception to survive. In short, AI Ma sat down after getting the answer. The students also widened their eyes and observed the bright moon on the table more seriously. As for whether they could find a little bit of feeling from it or see something, in any case, Dake couldn't see anything at all. He blinked his eyes and tried his best to see the uneven surface of the moon on the table, but the pixel of the moon was clearly not enough. No matter how carefully he looked, he could only see the changes in the moon's brightness, some undetectable movements, the surrounding clouds, and the occasional flash of stars in the quiet night. He couldn't imagine how he could speculate the future from this little bit of information. Maybe he really didn't have the talent in this area. Or maybe it was because he had already lost his childhood innocence and could no longer learn astrology. But fortunately, he still had the heart-warming little Ivan. Dake turned the stand around and placed it on the edge of the table, facing himself. Then he placed Illusory Beast, Ivan, on the stand so that Ivan could clearly see the changes in the moon. Did you see anything? Dake injected magic into the tip of the magic pen and poked Ivan's head. However, Ibuzachan shook his head like a rattledrum and stared at him anxiously. No hurry. Dake was still very patient, especially when supervising others' work. It's useless to act coquettishly. Dake poked his little ear again. Little Ivan's face was full of resentment. After a few minutes of quiet observation, the little magisters who couldn't see anything couldn't help but whisper. More and more noises started to appear in the classroom. Midya's gaze swept the entire classroom and finally stopped on Eudora. Feeling carefully, she found that the atmosphere with her as the center was gradually changing. She seemed to be immersed in some kind of feeling. Professor Midya nodded slightly and introduced a projection on her desk. Then she clapped her hands and said, "The knowledge of divination is endless. Astrology is only one part of it. If you want to learn astrology, imagination is very important. First of all, we have to let our thoughts be unconstrained. We can see deer from horses, green from the sun, and star charts from people. Diviners are rational, but beginners are emotional. Let go of your thoughts and do your best to make everything wonderful." Midya tapped her magic wand lightly, and the night sky on the desk suddenly changed. The dark background of the night sky seemed to have turned into ink. It swept up and swallowed the night sky like a wave. Finally, it turned into a three-dimensional starry sky of stars. From that starry sky, the moonlight shot out a line and connected all the stars, forming a flickering star chart. It was magnificent. With just this point, some people in the classroom suddenly entered a state of mind. The starry sky on many people's desks had slight changes. Professor Midya continued to tap on the star chart and then lit up 9 stars in turn. 9 is the number of extremes. Tonight, 9 stars will shine brightly. At this moment, bright starlight burst out on Eudora's desk. The starlight that held up the night sky and illuminated the darkness flickered frequently as if time had accelerated. Eudora opened her hands, and her fair and tender face was full of confusion. Unknowingly, her eyes had been dyed pitch black. Specks of twinkling stars adorned them, mysterious and profound. Professor Midya narrowed her eyes abruptly, and the silver moon in the depths of her eyes gradually rose. The little sorcerers present were even more shocked. A few students around Eudora seemed to know her for the first time. They showed an abnormally shocked expression, and then they couldn't help but retreat. The focus of the entire classroom was on her. Dake didn't forget to turn the face of the magic card to Eudora. Although he had expected it, he was also surprised. Even if he hadn't seen it personally, he could guess that this was a sign of divination. Unlike Professor Midya's casual prediction during the first lecture, Eudora's divination was likely to be official. Stars appeared in her eyes. She was observing fate. Ah! Suddenly, there was a scream. Eudora's face instantly distorted, revealing a painful expression. The stars in her eyes became chaotic. The starry sky in front of her swept like a storm. A majestic and terrifying atmosphere suddenly erupted. Silently, they forced the surrounding students of the Aristocrats' Academy away. A panicked voice sounded at the same time. Some were flustered, and some were excited. At this moment, almost everyone realized that Eudora was performing a divination. The girl at the same table looked at Professor Midya helplessly. She looked at her for help. However, the professor only raised her hand and gestured for her to be quiet. Midya's expression was equally serious. A diviner's first prophecy was actually very dangerous, because no one knew what price she had to pay for it. Every fortune-teller had to pay a different price at different times. Some diviners even had to pay with their lives at the first divination. Their prophecies were their last words. However, if they interrupted the divination at this moment, there would be a backlash. Of course, Midya wouldn't do that. Every true diviner had to experience the first time. This was inevitable, and it was also the first step to climb to the sky. Eudora was taking the first step. This was a good thing. Bang! The starry sky on the table suddenly exploded. Eudora's eyes instantly widened. Her pink lips opened and closed slightly, and a toneless voice slowly came out. I still have something to do in the afternoon. I'll continue writing when I come back tonight. Chapter 283. The stars have fallen, the sky has collapsed, the day will no longer be day, the night will no longer be night, and the gods will no longer be gods. Blood. Blood. It's all blood. Piles of bones, mountains of corpses. He's dead, she's dead, they're all dead. Everyone has to die. Ah! With another scream, Eudora suddenly came back to her senses. The dark night sky in her eyes retreated like a tide, and her eyes became clear again. The fear that appeared on her face just now was like an act. There was no trace of it left. She looked around blankly, as if she was very confused that she had suddenly become the focus of attention. What happened? Remember the website, Vipkanchu. VIP with great effort, Eudora asked with a trembling voice. However, the students were also shocked by her shocking prophecy at this moment. Even Professor Midya couldn't help but stop in her tracks. Professor, what price did she pay? Dake Diming's voice came from behind, causing Professor Midya to suddenly wake up. She quickly composed herself and glanced in the direction of Dake, seemingly surprised by his clear thinking. Then, she walked back to Eudora and bent down. As her cleavage tilted, she reached out to hold Eudora's face and observed it carefully. Eudora was a child with a very soft personality on the surface. At this time, she didn't know how to deal with it at all. She could only let Professor Midya fiddle with her repeatedly. After a long while, Professor Midya took a deep breath and stared at Eudora's eyes with a solemn gaze. In those timid eyes, there was a shining golden star that couldn't be hidden. Although Eudora had the eyes of stars would not appear in her normal state. Now, the golden star in her eyes was obviously the after-effect of divination. Although it's not the most fatal, it's the most troublesome type. Midya couldn't help but frown. However, this was not something that could be said directly in front of the students. At this time, as a professor, she should find a way to appease the fear caused by the prophecy. Therefore, she relaxed her brows very naturally and revealed a relieved smile. Fortunately, there are no obvious after-effects. After class, come with me to Sister Kalien and do a thorough check. Hearing this, Eudora asked timidly, Professor, what happened just now? Midya waved her wand and a stream of light appeared in the air. She smiled and said, Congratulations, you have completed your first divination as an astrologer. First divination? Eudora looked blank. But why don't I remember anything? Midya smiled. There are a lot of factors involved in this. It's related to magic power and the brain's ability to withstand it. Of course, it is also related to the strength of your astrology. Eudora couldn't help but lower her head and ask nervously, Do you mean that I can become an astrologer? Midya smiled and nodded, Yes. If you are willing, I would like to be your guide. Eudora opened her mouth in disbelief. Professor Midya had left a very good impression on the little mages. Not to mention her series of titles, just the fact that she was from Star Tower was a huge plus point. Star Tower could be said to be the holy land of astrologers. Every astrologer was proud to be able to enter Star Tower. If Eudora became Professor Midya's disciple, entering Star Tower in the future was basically a matter of certainty. Midya rubbed her head gently and said softly, "Don't be too anxious to make a decision. Let's have a good talk after class. After all, this is a very important matter, and it also requires your parents' consent." Eudora just nodded cutely with her mouth half open. After this small interlude of accepting a disciple, the little archmage finally recovered from the frightening prophecy just now. After all, the person who said the prophecy was Eudora, not Professor Midya, so some people didn't take it too seriously. Moreover, prophets had always been mysterious. Many of the words they said contradicted the literal meaning, and there were many extremely exaggerated ones. Especially in recent years, sensational prophecies had become more and more frequent. In fact, there were still many people who cared. Professor Midya was obviously very clear. After she used the matter of accepting a disciple to divert some attention, she said casually, "Let's continue with the class. In the last class, we assigned an assignment on the interpretation of a one-sentence prophecy. I think everyone should already understand that the interpretation of a prophecy is a very personal thing. For example, Eudora probably just saw a painting of Bigaskar. There was some laughter in the classroom. Bigaskar was the main representative of contemporary abstract painters. He liked to use a large number of distorted color blocks like flowing water to lay the drawing paper. It was as if a composition would appear in the mind just by mentioning him. Black and white paint divided a piece of drawing paper into two halves horizontally. Black was the top, white was the bottom, and they were mixed with each other. The slanted yellow dots were the falling stars. The bright red arc was the flowing blood. The white blocks were the accumulation of corpses. At first glance, it seemed to be just a child's graffiti. Only after taking a closer look would one realize that it was really a child's graffiti. Professor Midya's casual remark had indeed played a big role. But there were still people who recorded the prophecy and carefully analyzed it. Dake was one of them. But the more they analyzed, the more they would discover. Eudora's prophecy was actually not much different from the alarmist words of the prophets in recent years. It was nothing more than the resurrection of the Demon King. And Dake knew. It was as if the storm caused by the wings of a butterfly was not enough to overturn everything. The Demon King would eventually be resurrected, and the brave would also step onto the stage. Just like the script of a stage opera, it was a set play. However, the changes in the era were destined to make it impossible to stir up a storm. At that time, they only needed to pour a cup of black tea, put on a few syrup pancakes, and do their job as a spectator. Watching from afar was the best contribution to this play. At least that was what he believed at the moment. The astronomy class had just begun, so it naturally would not end like this. After experiencing Eudora's divination, the students became more interested in the piece of night on the table. Professor Midya explained as he patrolled. In his heart, he was also thinking about Eudora's prophecy. Just from the prophecy itself, it was not surprising. It was even partially similar to the prophecy that she wanted to verify. But the problem was that there were too many similar prophecies. Prophets always predicted peace during war and war during peace because it was inevitable in the cycle of history. It was impossible for a prophecy to be wrong. And based on this kind of mentality, it was easier to see related things. Midya suddenly stopped. She saw that the night in front of Saraswati had a more obvious change. "What did you see?" Midya asked softly. Sarah closed her eyes. After a moment, she said, "It's fate." Midya was speechless. When the professor walked past her, Sarah quietly opened her eyes a little. She looked at her back and revealed a playful smile. Professor Midya immediately came to Ai Ma Metis's side. She found that Ai Ma was raising her hands and casting a spell on the night like a witch from the old era. It actually caused some changes. Midia shook her head in amusement. 3 stars. Tonight, 9 stars will shine brightly. 6 stars left. Wow, it's coming. It's coming. Little Fatty Pitten's sudden outburst attracted Professor Midia's attention. She knocked the top of his head with a bat to make him quiet down. Silently, Luo Boat's eyes were filled with blood. White, who was racking his brains, suddenly noticed the change in the atmosphere around him. He wanted to wake up Luo Boat, but when he looked up and saw Professor Midia's smile, he quickly covered his mouth. The night in front of Luo Boat rolled slightly. The edge of the night gradually began to flow. Immediately afterward, Heidi, who was sitting at the same table with Sarah, also caught that little feeling. Then a person from the fool's house. 7 stars. Dake, who was teasing little Ivan, suddenly found that the atmosphere in the front row was a bit wrong. He suddenly raised his head. He saw that the night in front of Luo C was shining with countless stars. Dake subconsciously looked up at the sky. Through the ceiling, which was divided into hundreds of pieces, he could see the night sky. He looked down at the night in front of Luo C. He finally realized that she also found that trace of feeling. Professor Midia walked over. She was not too surprised by Luo C. Flottie's success. She had paid attention to Miss Flottie during the previous week's astronomy class. Flottie used to be one of the noblest surnames in the kingdom. But things changed with the passage of time. No matter how bright the stars were, there would be a time when they would fall. The collapse of the Flottie family had certain historical factors, but it also had a lot to do with its own ancient system. Since ancient times, the Flottie family had divided the main family and the branch family. The main family only had one bloodline, and the branch family would be demoted to a branch family. They would not be able to come in contact with any real inheritance. Once the bloodline of the main family died, the entire inheritance system would collapse in an instant. With the death of Luo C's parents, the fall of the Flottie family was inevitable. But tides rose and fell, clouds gathered and dispersed. After a fall, there would be a rise. Professor Midia was a staunch fatalist. She always believed, a great man is born great, his fate is already determined. Halfway through class, the 9th star still did not appear. Professor Midia clapped her hands and did not wait any longer. Then now, the one who has seen fate, please interpret fate. You're tuning in to the Narrate and Escape YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.